This is Dekulin, a villain in the story who always had the same fate, death. There are 1,000 different paths, and in every single one he ends up dead somehow, because that's what he was made for. Once again he wakes up starting another cycle of his life, but this time something feels off. When he walks up to the mirror, he gives a slight smile, because something happened that nobody saw coming this time. This is Woojin, the developer behind this character, and his only job is to make sure Dekulin's death is satisfying for the players. His boss, who is also his ex-girlfriend, shows up just to tell him she's leaving for a guy who's way better than him. Fueled by hatred and jealousy, he starts dumping a bunch of important attributes onto Dekulin, but the most important one is called comprehension, basically the ability to instantly understand any magic or feeling, but right after, he regrets it because this could break the game. Right as he's about to cancel it, lightning strikes, the lights go out and Woojin goes out with them. No Truckkin this time. When he opens his eyes he realizes he's somewhere completely different with a woman screaming in his ear. This is where everything changed. Woojin woke up inside Dekulin's body. He's completely panicking on the inside, but on the outside he looked calm because of the dignity attribute. A week has already passed, and he was starting to get used to living in this world. He analyzes the possible paths ahead of him. Since he was the one who created the character, he knew every possible outcome. On top of that, he had the comprehension ability that he himself added before getting pulled in. Even though he's a villain, he's also a professor, so he needs to head to Imperial University. In the carriage, he notices an assistant trembling in fear beside him. Woojin recognizes the boy's work on the papers, and as any good developer who values talent, he tries to give a compliment. He tries to say, "Good job, man." What actually comes out?
It's pretty difficult to put into words how disgusted I am.
His body turns every attempt at kindness into arrogance because of Dekulin's personality. He arrives at the university. Dekulin is famous for being a genius at magical interpretation. There's just one rotten detail in this story. He's a fraud. All of his fame comes from stealing other mages' research and patenting it as his own. Woojin knows this because he's the one who wrote that dirty story. He walks into the classroom, steps onto the stage, and when he looks toward the back of the room, he finds a girl staring at him with pure hatred. Her father took his own life because Dekulin stole the research he dedicated his life to. The developer knows exactly who she is. He knows she's one of the main reasons he's going to die. Now he has two choices: keep playing the arrogant villain and wait for the knife in his back, or use that comprehension attribute he accidentally installed to rewrite his fate. The problem: using that ability burns through his life faster than gasoline. She knew he wasn't a real mage and decided to expose him in front of everyone. Ifrine, the girl who lost her father, decides to cast a complex spell and asks him to explain what kind of magic it is. If he gets it wrong, everyone will know he's a fake, but she has no idea about his new ability. His mind processes the spell in milliseconds, and he says, "Enchantment barrier." Ifrine freezes and thinking, how does he know the name? Leaving the classroom, he runs into Julie, the future greatest knight of the Empire, and who demands a duel he had promised her. Their relationship is a political disaster. Rich families, arranged marriage, zero love. She only agreed to marry him because she thought he was talented. Now she knows he's just a lazy piece of trash and wants to prove it in combat. The next day, he was going through a list of new spells using two of his passive attributes, Midas Wealth and Sharp Vision. When he looks at the students' enrollment forms, the names start to glow. The brighter the glow, the more money and success that student will have. On the list, there's one name that shines brighter than all the others. When he reads it, he finds out it's Afarine Luna, the girl who tried to humiliate him earlier. The original Dekulin would have torn the paper apart, but Woojin signs the approval and decides to try to stop her from killing him because she's a gold mine. In this world, everyone wants his head, and that's exactly why he needs to get as strong as possible to survive. The most adequate way for our hero to escape death was to become more powerful. Yet seeing how his character's potential was just ordinary, he had no way of escaping the numerous future ominous deaths. But despite it all, his attributes could turn out to be a great advantage, as his character had the necessary potential to control the elements of fire and earth. Combining both of them gives the character the attribute of Midas Touch, unlocking one's potential by resorting to the mana reserves of the caster. This allowed our hero to manipulate metal and fully control levitating blades, and despite how fancy it sounds, it was just a basic manipulation magic, making the hero realize that it could potentially cover his lack of power. Yet in order to acquire the skill, the professor needed to learn manipulation first, and so he decided to put it to the test. Just like that, the pages of the book began to shine. Great magic suddenly filled the room, as a small tornado gathered around our hero. Jiwoo felt overwhelmed as the basic knowledge of telekinesis was being poured into his brain, and so it ended. The hero looked at the metal pen, and was happy to see himself able to levitate it. This left him amazed, as he could now casually use telekinesis, which was something he had only seen from behind his monitor. Yet the intermediate boss was fully aware that such magic could never help him reach his desired level regarding telekinesis. And so he began to think of a solution. The protagonist wondered if he was able to draw magic circles on his whole body, seeing how magic circles' power was proportional to their size. The hero planned to use the skill comprehension in order to fully understand his organs in order to enhance his tactile anesthesia, and despite its effects on one's body, the skill Iron Man that strengthens one's physique would allow him to sustain the damage. Such a feat could only be realized by him as he only had 800 mana left, which should be enough for a little test, and so he began casting the spell as runes began to circulate throughout his entire blood vessels. With that, the protagonist was plunged into unbearable pain, one like none other, that made him feel as if his body was being entirely torn apart, and yet he was determined to withstand it without showing any signs of weakness, as it was part of his elegance as an aristocrat, and so it ended. The spell was now over. Deculaeon, who was left with a single mana, had failed his experiment due to his small reserves, but it wasn't all for nothing, as a small magic circle had appeared on his left shoulder, making him realize that he will get his dream body in 2 weeks. A month had passed after our hero's seminar at the university's magic tower, and it was now the first day of the lecture. The students were left intrigued as, unlike what their seniors told them, the professor tasked them with bringing him results from this element-rich area as a test. This left all the students intrigued, as the assignment was odd and the professor was nowhere to be seen. This also particularly annoyed Ephorine Luna, and just as she began to complain, someone in a rush suddenly bumped into her. The angry girl then turned to this individual, only for anger to be replaced by fear, upon recognizing her as Sylvia von Josephine Elud. Seeing her left the silver-haired one shocked, but to her surprise, the girl just walked away. Ephorine Luna was left baffled upon seeing how Lady Illid recognized her as a stranger. A little later in the test area, a small stone structure was being formed. Ephorine Luna was left intrigued, as she was certain that this lady was from the Illid family. She was particularly pissed off as this family had surrounded her manor a decade ago in order to threaten her and her father's great magical talent. Suddenly, the girl's construct began to vanish. This left her angry, as it seemed like magic was being drawn somewhere else. Ephorine Luna then saw the young Illide creating a construct right beside her, and so she came demanding an explanation, stating that the girl had stolen all the mana that she was using, yet she wasn't gratified with a response, which left her greatly irritated. But just then she realized that the young Illid was just acting as if they were total strangers, stating that it would have been impossible not to recognize her, seeing how Illid forced her to abandon magic and that the girl was scared of her potential. Yet to her shock, Sylvia affirmed that she didn't recognize her, but that she was acquainted with her father, calling him an arrogant fallen noble that met his end, leaving his daughter filled with rage. Just then, one of the students was left startled and alerted the others. The 2 students were now fighting. Sylvia found herself in a tough situation, as the angry fallen noble dared her to repeat her words. Lady Illide, who was left terrified, quickly activated her magical shield. The collision resulted in a great explosion that had almost blown away the rest of the students. As the explosion reached its end, all were left confused, only to see the angry student holding the girl by her hair. Suddenly, the both of them noticed something intriguing, as an ominous scene presented itself before them. To everyone's shock, a void was created by the impact of the 2 students' mana, allowing it to absorb its surroundings. The void was bound to explode, bursting metal shards everywhere, which would surely result in everyone's demise, and so the void went off. Ephorine Luna created a shield in order to protect herself, but to her surprise, nothing was happening. Just then, the protagonist appeared. All were left amazed as the metal shards were postponed into the air, and so the professor began to comment on them. All were left amazed by the telekinesis, as all fell in love with the magnificence of magic, seeing how they were all mages, a parenthesis. This was enchantment magic that none could deny its beauty. After all of the metal shards had been gathered, the professor ended the lecture before asking the 2 troublemakers to stay behind. With that, Ephorine Luna began to fear the worst. Shortly after, inside the interrogation room, the man pointed out how the protagonist and the chairwoman had arrived first. Relin, the professor from the support studies department, and Retlin, the professor from the spirit studies department, had made their entrances. Adeline Segalian welcomed both of them and apologized for summoning them so suddenly, as it was an urgent matter. And so the present professors began to talk about how it was a fallen, nameless noble who had harmed Sylvia, a daughter of Elade, and how the protagonist managed to stop the conflict before it could escalate into a full-blown disaster. Seeing how the fat one was licking his boots, the hero noticed how the outcome of this meeting was certain, seeing how everyone here only cared about themselves. As the debate was between the daughter of a very influential house and one who comes from a fallen nobility, making it obvious who the staff would be rooting for. With that being said, the hero decided to root for the opposite side, seeing how he could clearly perceive the scarlet energy coming out of the fallen noble. His attributes allowed him to be the only one to see it before realizing that this was a potential death route that he must change. And so the disciplinary meeting had now commenced. And so the fat one began to scream at the culprit for causing such a mess, stating that they were lucky that the head professor was here to stop them. And when asked for a reason behind her behavior, the fallen noble refused to answer. She was determined to keep silent, as Deculane was certainly present among the disciplinary staff. Tears began to roll down her eyes, seeing how she couldn't admit to her enemy how the girl had insulted her father. This lack of cooperation greatly pissed off the support studies professor, stating that she had no right to ignore the gap that separated her status from Sylvia's. And so he asked the one from the influential family to give her side of the story, making her claim that it was all due to her destroying her work by mistake. She was then accused of having poor anger management as she made such a scene due to Lady Illide's mistake while being a fallen noble. Ephorine Luna couldn't help but find it unfair as her expulsion was brought to the table, seeing how she was being fiercely scolded and humiliated in a simple disciplinary meeting with no one to take her side, making it all seem very unfair. And so she blamed it all on her father's enemy. The chairwoman then pointed out how everyone seemed to have taken the same side, and so she turned to the head professor, who was present at the scene, in order to make the final judgment. And as he began to speak, the girl assumed herself to be doomed. He then asked one of them if she truly believed to have her hands clean regarding this incident. Yet to everyone's surprise, he was talking to Sylvia von Josephine Illide. The fallen noble was particularly amazed as her rival was being questioned. She and everyone present were left baffled by this sudden behavior. Deculane then pointed out how Lady Illide could have easily avoided the conflict, stating that her so-called abilities that everyone feared were actually much weaker than she wanted people to believe. And so the humbled noble, to the fallen one's surprise, apologized, stating that she wanted her to get in trouble, which is why she let the situation escalate. Ephorine Luna was left blown away, as despite knowing that she was to blame, regardless, the head professor turned his questions to Lady Illide. The fat one claimed that only the one that attacked was at fault, so the protagonist affirmed that he was actually to blame for organizing such a session, leaving the girl more and more intrigued, seeing how everyone was rooting for the other side, yet he placed himself at risk in order to protect her. It was then that the chairwoman decided to end the discussion, proposing to not punish either of them, seeing how it was natural for young students who had recently become debutantes to fight among each other. This made the fallen noble shiver, as none were blamed, thinking of how the normal Deculane would have gotten her expelled, leaving her utterly confused and intrigued. As they walked away, the fat one began to praise the protagonist for his sharp observational skills. When suddenly someone claimed his attention, the frustrated Ephorine Luna stood trembling in front of him, stating that she had something to ask him, and if he recalled her last name and was acquainted with her father, who ended his own life after secretly suffering tragedies. Upon seeing how the girl was determined to ask her question, the man wasn't left surprised. Ephorine Luna was determined to know if the man recalled her family and its head that was lost 2 times due to his manipulation. She then assumed that he does remember her family, making her certain that he will deny everything in order to shield himself. Yet the possibility of having forgotten everything about the household of Luna would make her even more sad. Yet to her surprise, the man pointed out that this question was pointless, stating that her talent was too great to be pinned to the past. With that, he made his leave, leaving her alone in the interrogation room. Upon hearing this, the girl's doubts were confirmed as her enemy recalled her and her parent, which is why he had decided to support her, assuming that he had built up some kind of guilt in his heart, and this was the only reason he had come to her rescue. This also made her assume that he only had pity on her, yet this eased the pain in her heart, seeing how she and her father weren't forgotten. The girl was left satisfied by the current outcome, allowing our hero to close yet another doorway to death, earning him 2 store currencies. Shortly after, inside the car, Giltheon von Lidwich, the head of House Illade, and an Esper mage, affirmed to the lady that she didn't need to worry about the fallen noble, as despite having great potential, she missed her chance. Sylvia and Ephorine had met a decade ago on the day of the entrance exam of the academy, where the old man was left blown away, seeing how both of them had what it takes to become archmages. Seeing how 2 mages with such talent had appeared, all were left confused. Eternal, who was a being above the Emperor, was the zenith of the world of magic, and those who become it are called archmages, making them legends. Yet a fundamental rule stated that only 3 mages were allowed to hold that title within one era, and with Demerkin being one, and the chairwoman at the brink of nomination, only 1 seat remains, leaving the big family of Illade to face the small house of Luna for the last seat of Eternal. and she quickly understood that her father tried to force the father of her rival to forbid her from attending the academy, making her realize that she was the only reason behind her family harassing the Luna household, as it was in order to give her the advantage over her regarding the desired position. Ascending to such a prestigious status was always her cherished dream. Sylvia then found herself filled with anger, as she was being taunted by her rival, claiming that she only lost due to misfortune. Yet to her shock, the head of the house stated that Lady Luna wasn't as big of a threat as the head professor, as he was a complex individual who was considered a genius in his childhood and could easily make a sudden move that none would expect. Yet the girl was already aware that her plot was uncovered by the protagonist. As back when the explosion occurred, she made her rival's mana disappear and placed a trap that would go off after coming in contact with the girl's magic in order to cause her big problems with a big accident. Yet the head professor had uncovered her despite doing her best to be wary of any observational magic nearby. The man had also resolved it, as none of the two would be punished, instead blaming it all on her. Sylvia quickly realized that it was an ominous silent threat that she had no choice but to comply with. This made the frustrated lady unable to understand the process of the head professor. A few days later at our hero's residence, the protagonist was fully dressed and ready to go. After getting inside the car, he began to think of how it was for the best to root for the fallen noble, as it closed a shroud as well as earning him store currency. Jiwoo was shocked to see that it was this named character who surely harbored hostility towards this character back then, asking him the question, and despite having potentially made Lady Iliad an enemy, he had no choice but to close the closest death route. Jiwoo would have rather not attended social events, yet he had to attend the Flower of the New Year event as a side quest in order to earn more store currency. As upon obtaining 5, he will finally be able to use the shop, which is why he needed to go see if any known character will be attending the event. And so the professor was welcomed at the party. All seemed well dressed and having a good time. The hero noticed some high-ranking aristocrats and numerous named characters that he knew about. Yet his attention was focused on one in particular, which was Yahello, a character that he himself designed. And just as he began to think that he had made the right call by attending the event, he was suddenly noticed by a noble who seemed overjoyed to see him. Just then, everyone's attention was shifted to him. All rushed to Dekulen, making him realize that his decision was too hasty. The mention of Ganesha and her continental journal caught his attention. The protagonist started to act odd, to the man's shock, and so our hero went on his way in order to meet Ganesha for his own sake, seeing how she would be pivotal to the plot, even for adventurers. Yet he had a hard time locating her. Just then, someone was watching him from afar. The lady that he was searching for was secretly giving him dark gazes while searching for the sad lady, and just as he began to lose all hope of finding her, he suddenly laid his eyes on the side adventurer. The woman had adventurers close, as well as red hair braided in pigtails. Yet just as he rushed to meet her, he was suddenly approached by a bland man, leaving him very annoyed, as it was no other than the Imperial exclusive mage monarch known as Wilhelm von Garion Rewind. The man claimed to be happy that the professor remembered him, before asking him about his studies and pointing out the rumors. This made the hero quickly realize that the man was just trying to get the best of him by stating that his talents were doubted, seeing how he didn't show progress. Yahello and Dekulen studied together at University Edward and were great friends until the character became his peer's subject of hate after becoming head professor. The hero assumed that his character would not really have been angered by these claims, yet he couldn't, seeing how they were all true. But just then he noticed that the adventurer was now nowhere to be seen. This greatly irritated him, seeing how he had lost sight of someone this important just by talking to someone this miserable, and so he approached the character that he had modeled, before angrily asking them to scrap off as he insulted him. With that being said, our hero set to find the explorer, leaving his old peer, who had ruined his plans, utterly annoyed. Later on, everyone began to search for the head professor, who was left annoyed, expressing his dislike for such events, seeing how despite shaking off the monarch, many others tried to reach him. Just then, he was approached by yet another person, who, to his utter shock, turned out to be the adventurer that he sought. Ganesha asked the man if they had been gathered by fate or by his own will, and while the man claimed that he only lost his path, the adventurer took it as a joke, stating that he must be searching for her, as they had business together. Our hero quickly realized that the character and her maintained a professional relationship, seeing how she talked about giving him back what he paid. The lady apologized for not bringing the head professor a talented kid like he asked her, before correcting herself, stating that she had formed a bond with the young one, which is why she couldn't hand the child over. This cleared all of our hero's doubts, as it was something that his character had once done. Dekulen tried to cover his own weakness by abusing a promising child, and so Ganesha decided to ask our hero a question. She was curious if he planned to keep on this way of living, As he began to think deeply about the question, he thought of how his character would accept the bootlicking, as well as hurt his allies and loved ones for his own sake, and so he affirmed to the adventurer that he plans to turn his life around. To her utter shock, this greatly amazed her, seeing how she had prepared herself for the intermediate boss to try and take her life, seeing how she had taken and ditched a secret mission that he had given her. But the hero decided to drop the matter. The protagonist knew that his character almost didn't care about his own life, seeing how he would try to fight someone as strong as Ganesha, despite being ignorant about his original character. The adventurer was someone powerful enough to easily kill a man, as her physique had reached its zenith due to her attributes, invincible body and master of all martial arts. Jiwoo assumed that he had become his character just before he could send assassins in order to take the adventurer's life. And while still being a little intrigued, our hero had accomplished his purpose at the social gathering by getting acquainted with Ganesha, and so he decided to go back home, stating that the adventurer shouldn't pay him any mind. The intrigued lady asked if he was truly going to leave her be, which our hero affirmed. With that, the adventurer was left baffled. The hero was well aware that he could use his family's power on the Adventurers Guild to protect himself from her, yet risked opening new death doors. But just then he was left amazed upon having earned a store currency for avoiding death by villain's fate. Upon seeing how he could flee from death instead of facing it, the hero realized that this conversation could have potentially led to one of his numerous deaths, and that he must stay wary at all times. Just then, Debatin called Rayleigh, who was related to Julie, and asked her if she will stay here for a longer time. The knight stated that she didn't wish to attend the event, as she refused to comply with her young cousin, leaving her concerned. Just then, Julie was left at unease as Rayleigh asked about a certain individual. The girl then clarified that she was talking about the knight's fiancé before pointing out all the gossip around them. Julie grew frustrated upon remembering their last encounter before explaining to the younger one how they had a bad relationship, and just as Rayleigh urged her cousin to keep her voice down, Goody's attention was suddenly attracted by the arrival of her fiancé. To her shock, he kept on walking. All were amazed to see the extroverted head professor leaving the event so early without paying attention to his own promise. Julie was left sad as all began to gossip about how the rumors regarding her relationship with the protagonist were true, and so, with Deculine leaving the event early, everyone assumed that it was due to his bad relationship with his fiancée. 7 days had passed since our hero attended the social gathering. During those 7 days, the hero began to exercise his body as well as his magic in order to enhance his stamina, seeing how an act of madness had almost caused his own demise. A few days ago, as magic began to fill the room, our hero found himself on his knees, weakened, coughing blood. The hero, who assumed that he had only survived due to his iron body, aimed for more power after encountering Ganesha, and so he tried to give himself fire control. All of this was in order to refine himself by implanting the center of magic into telekinesis in order to learn magic faster. The hero quickly realized that this came with its own risks, seeing how much pain his body was being put through, which is why he decided to work out. Just like that, our hero created himself a morning routine. With that being said, came the time for work. Later that same day in our hero's office, Alan explained how the Magic Tower had sent him a statement, and that the one who sent it was the Committee of Qualification Professors, leaving our hero utterly annoyed. According to the letter, the committee wanted to hear about his magical studies after 6 months, which is why he needed to prepare the necessary documents. The protagonist was now in a tough situation, seeing how it meant that his character didn't make any magical progress whatsoever, even before the possession. The intermediate boss had always been labeled as Professor inside the files of the game. After assuming that this title was a prerequisite to the main quest, the hero began to think that he will never return to the normal world if he is stripped of it. With that being said, our hero stopped, and wished to find anything of interest inside his character's laboratory. Upon opening the door, the protagonist was left baffled as the laboratory was left dirty and in chaos. Seeing this place's state made him realize that his character hadn't set foot here in a long time, before suddenly noticing trash that seemed out of its place, making him assume that it was concealing something. The disgusted main character realized that this was something befitting of his villain persona, and so he snatched the item, relieved, by using his manipulation, which turned out to be a journal. Upon reading it, the hero realized that his game counterpart had encrypted it in order to keep his studies safe, yet this technique failed in front of his skill comprehension. The game developer was left stunned by what was entering his mind. Seeing how much golden light was getting out of the pages made our hero realize that his attributes were pointing out how amazing these researches were. Yet to his shock, the research wasn't finished, as some pages were torn apart while others came from an incorrect logic. But despite it all, it was enough for his attributes to go off. Just then, he noticed a medallion of his student. A sad expression blended itself on our hero's face, as the girl's father, who worked for his character, placed this in the trash as a last-ditch effort to conceal it. This made him realize why he was hated by the Luna family so much, as he was the reason behind his student's misery. With that being said, his mind was settled. He will use his comprehension attribute in order to complete the research before giving credit to Mr. Luna, as the one who helped him through his research, seeing how he needed to give credit to himself. Shortly after, inside the university cafe known as Light and Coffee, someone stated that commoners should ally with each other, seeing how they were only 30 in the class and that they will have a hard life if they don't stick together. The girl asked Ephraim, the fallen noble, if she agreed with her. Yet, in the end, she didn't mind being considered a commoner, seeing how she had neither house nor land. To the girl's shock, her friend affirmed that she must be a peasant. Lady Luna found herself amused, seeing how everyone was treating her as an influential figure among commoners. Just then, a boy pointed out how they needed the unlikely permission of a professor in order to form their own club. The orange-haired one stated that this might be their toughest challenge. Many professors were being proposed, yet none were good enough, seeing how they either adored nobles or despised commoners. Just then, someone pointed out how the protagonist would surely refuse, which came to the red-haired one's attention. And just as Luna found herself entirely focused on the dessert in front of her, she was startled by her friend stating that they should ask the head professor to help them. To her utter shock, she was expected to be the one to make the request. One of the students pointed out that he would be ideal, seeing how he despised nobles and commoners alike. The commoner girl pointed out that the professor must be interested in the bright student, which is why he had. Yet Lady Luna was certain that he wasn't that kind. Ephraim Luna was determined to get as far away from our protagonist as possible, and so she excused herself before running out of the cafeteria, stating that her involvement will only anger the head professor even more. But just then, she was left intrigued by her startled friend, before noticing it herself. The student was asked to get out of the way by none other than our protagonist. Seeing him left the little Luna shocked. This coincidence left her quite surprised. Ephraim Luna was then left quite annoyed by her friend who let her confront the professor alone. And upon seeing him walking away, she pulled out the documents, stating that she needed his signature in order to create a club of her own. Despite the girl not wanting to approach the professor and pointing out how he despised groups made out of commoners, her friend wasn't wrong, seeing how none of the teachers would agree to their request, which is why they should make this desperate attempt. To the girl's utter shock, the professor asked her to send the details to his office, and so he handed her back the papers, which were actually signed. To her utter bafflement, still unable to believe that her father's enemy had agreed to help them. And while her friend was filled with joy, she couldn't bring herself to understand the same kindness that he had showcased in the disciplinary committee. Later on, the professor stated that the lesson will be about the pure elements, which were the basis of magic, and how some confused them for categorical magic. While the girl assumed that his consciousness was getting heavy, or that he might be trying to show her some kindness, she could only see it as hypocrisy, seeing how he was the reason behind her father's demise. Ephraim Luna grew frustrated, thinking that the man should just confess his sin if he truly regrets it. Just then, her friend snapped her back to reality. The red-haired one was asking her to not be hurt by a certain group who only knows how to gossip. Just then, she noticed the group in question. Ephraim Luna began to fear the worst, seeing how she had made herself an enemy of the aristocracy within the school. And so she said that they should pay them no mind and simply focus on the lesson. Yet as the professor explained, the girl began to think of how different this course was from the rumors, as he stated how modifying the circle could change the color of the flame. Our protagonist pointed out that this would be today's subject, a spell called Flowing Fire. The girl wasn't totally mistaken, as while the character only used his position for power, Jiwoo lectured about magnificent mana, displaying a talent of teaching that left all of his students in awe. Lady Alad was one of them, seeing how she had lost the joy of learning due to her immense magic potential. With that being said, the protagonist showcased the magic circle for creating water, before fusing it with the fire magic circle, in order to create a brand new spell. That left everyone in shock. Fire had gained similar properties to water. Sylvia was particularly left blown away, seeing how surprised she was by how theoretical the professor's lessons were, as most prodigies cast spells using instinct, thinking that theory was just a useless limit, and that if everyone focused on theory, magic itself would become limited, which didn't seem out of the ordinary, seeing how consecrating more time for theory would reduce the time used for magic. Trying to fully understand each spell would surely cause trouble for one who is trying to practice. This was the contradiction of magic. In order for one to become a great mage, he must rely on instinct. Yet great mages themselves were unable to clarify the concept of instinct, which is why it was astonishing for someone whose skills are being questioned to give such a theory-focused lecture. Later on, someone pointed out how the actual lecture was different from the gossip Lady Luna, who was now in the dorms, stated that she was almost absorbed by it. Suddenly something unpleasant caught her attention, as the door to her dorm had been covered in hurtful messages. While just then she noticed something under it. This letter turned out to be a certificate for sponsorship, yet the girl couldn't believe it, seeing how no one would look her way as she was despised by both an influential household and the head professor. Ephraim Luna found this to be a great opportunity to turn in the false document in order to get a reward. Yet after passing by the Office of Magical Administration and slowly closing the door, the girl was left blown away, as this document wasn't fake. Back then, she was left amazed by the lady who affirmed the certainty of the document. With that, the fallen noble was left overjoyed, to the point where she began to pinch herself to make sure that this was no dream, yet she didn't want anyone to find out. In panic, the girl assumed that she should make an emergency case in case someone discovered the immense amount of money she was given. She even assumed that the staff member that she consulted would be coming for her money. And so, in an agitated state, she bumped her head into the desk, leaving her in great pain. But as this made her realize that this was reality, she was left overjoyed, seeing how her talent had been acknowledged by someone. With that being said, the fallen noble decided to get back on her feet, seeing how kind individuals were still present. With that being said, she was determined to do her best. Someone was unable to believe what they had just heard at our hero's manor. The butler affirmed to his half-sister that the man went to the auction in Schatzenjevel and that he should have arrived. This made the girl grow annoyed, as her half-brother had spent a ridiculous amount last year, making her fear what he might do this year. And so, she was determined to hold a grudge against her brother if he messes up once again. Meanwhile, our hero was eager to buy an item that he was longing for, as during his early days of studying telekinesis, he realized that his weakness could be compensated by the use of certain materials. The item that he currently possessed was the temporary wood steel. As he arrived at the waiting room, he began to think of how what he seeks would be put at auction today, when suddenly he recognized someone. Our hero was shocked to see the character's fiancé present in the room. The upset Julie quickly got up and approached her promised one. Upon seeing how annoyed she seemed, the hero was surprised to meet her here. The knight then pointed out how the professor had sent 2 debutantes to the committee. Yet the protagonist remained unfazed, accusing the girl of wanting to blame him for something he hadn't done. Julie urged him to not repeat the same sin of crushing young one's dreams, as it will come back to bite him one day. The knight affirmed that this was the last advice she will ever give him, leaving him to think. Seeing how these were the last words his fiancé would address to him, he quickly realized that Julie intended to break their union. Yet our hero didn't oppose that, seeing how he also didn't wish to marry someone he hadn't met in the real world out of convenience. Being around her placed our hero in a tough spot, seeing how her and her entourage were filled with death doors, and so the knight decided to regain her seat. Yet this left her fiancé intrigued, as he was fully aware that she wasn't the kind of person to attend such events. Julie was left baffled as the man called her out for coming here just to give him this little advice. The knight panicked and angrily stated that she wasn't here for him, but for an item that she sought instead. And so, after pouting in front of her fiancé, the protagonist couldn't help but admire how adorable Julie truly is. But this left him quite alarmed, seeing how he was just thinking of how dangerous being close to Julie truly is. This made him assume that the emotions of the character were invading his own. Just then, an announcement was made, pointing out the auction that was soon to commence. With that, he decided to drop his assumption, seeing how he didn't show clear signs of love toward the character's fiancée. Later on at the auction, the hero sat waiting. The first item, which was a vase from the east, was unveiled. Our hero could clearly see a shining golden light coming out of the said item. After comparing it with the file of the fallen noble, he quickly realized that wealthy magnate was at work before noticing how the light was getting stronger. The price was raised to 1,300,000. Another guest raised the price by 200,000. In the end, our hero, who was labeled as guest 777, was the victor as he had spent 2,500,000 on it. The wealthy man judged it wise to buy the vase, seeing how the light was still on despite the high price, meaning that it had much more value to offer. With that being said, the protagonist kept on buying item after item, such as a ring, a pair of scissors, and even a necklace. All were left impressed, seeing how he was winning all the deals, except his promised one, who finds him pitiful for seeking attention in an auction. Yeah, she deemed herself to not be like him, as instead of appreciating money, she was rather fond of modesty, and so she decided to leave him alone, as her main goal was to put her hand on the item known as Winter's Fire. With that came the time to present the final item of the auction, which was a rare material used to forge the greatest swords throughout the Empire's history. Just like that, Winter's Fire was presented to the buyers. Both the man and his fiancée were blown away by the ore known as the Snowflake Stone, which was one of the 10 rarest materials used for the creation of weapons. It also possessed the contradictory properties of fire and ice. Only living legendary items like dragon bones could surpass it. With that being said, the knight and the mage were both determined to buy off the legendary item. The selling price quickly escalated to 30 million elne, and just as Julie assumed that the item would be hers, she was left utterly shocked by number 777, who added $1 million to her price. The knight quickly recognized the number that was repeated so much. This left her utterly frustrated, seeing how her fiancé was opposing her. The both of them kept on fighting for the Snowflake Stone, which is used to create weapons. Some assumed that he wanted to give the bid to his fiancée. Just then, the gossip reached the protagonist himself, making him realize that he was competing with his fiancée for the precious material. The hero assumed that it was only natural for her to seek the item that he needed as well, and that winning the bidding might make her grow hateful of him. While the knight began to think of how this item had last been seen 3 years ago, and that its reappearance could take even longer, the protagonist decided to take the risk, seeing how he was determined to put his hand on his cherished items. With that being said, the crystal had been sold for 42 million elna to none other than our protagonist. The crowd then began to gossip about how thrilling this auction had been, while his fiancée heard it all. This made her grow frustrated as he repeated last year's scenery, which was something she had never wanted. The day of their engagement, which was very miserable for the lady, the character affirmed that he would give her anything that she wanted. It was his own way to showcase his own greatness. Yeah, she only felt embarrassment in front of all the treasure showcased, seeing how the man was already aware of what she truly sought from him. With that being said, she decided to cause a scene by leaving her own engagement day. This made the head professor grow utterly frustrated. Just then, some nasty rumors about her begging to be captain in the Knight's Order of her fiancé's family began spreading, with the culprit being obvious, which made him only look more pitiful in her eyes, seeing how he assumed that she would return if he just solidified her name. Julie rendered herself unable to love someone as despicable as this evil person. But just then, she was left surprised by her fiancé who had just approached her. The protagonist asked her if she also sought the Snowflare Stone, yet as she assumed that she was being insulted, our hero apologized to her, leaving her utterly amazed. With that being said, the head professor made his exit, leaving his fiancée speechless. This left her totally amazed, seeing how the arrogant one was apologizing for winning the auction. Just then, someone called the knight, which was none other than her older sister Josephine, the eldest daughter of their house. Later one night arrived, and our hero had returned home. The hero began to think of how shocking it was that not that door was opened by his fiancée, who must have been annoyed by his snatch of the precious ore, making him wonder how despicable the character must be for the knight to make up her mind and kill him as the servants welcomed him. But it then came to his attention that all of his servants were left at unease, and so they affirmed that his sister had arrived. The girl stood in a room waiting for him. Uriel explained that the money that he used for the auction should have been used in the mines. As he realized that he lacked attention, he affirmed to his sibling that he had purchased something that would bring them great riches, when suddenly she burst out at him. Our hero felt alerted as the girl pointed out how poorly she was being treated. Uriel, with tears rolling down her eyes, affirmed that she didn't want to make up for his mistakes anymore, affirming that she and the rest of the workers at the estate were doing their best despite the tough times they were facing. Yet the hero allowed himself luxuries, and so she affirmed that he was someone very despicable for throwing away such important funds, leaving him startled as the red aura around her was because of the skill. Villain's fate. But he could also sense wealthy magnet being at work due to the golden light paired with the red aura. It obviously meant that overcoming this deadly situation would bring our hero great wealth. The protagonist just stared at his sister, thinking that he knew how to resolve this issue. The girl then angrily explained how she forbade herself from living as a normal girl in order to work hard enough to compensate for his mistakes. As he tried to calm her down, she angrily called him out for living so extravagantly after the death of their parents. But just then, to her utter surprise, he proposed to make her the head of the house. The protagonist had to repeat his words to the girl who was unable to comprehend them, leaving her very pleased. The shocked lady began to use all kinds of vulgar language, which her brother called her out on, while affirming that he only speaks the truth. This shocked the girl, as when a mage breaks his oath, he is bound to death, making her realize that her half-brother wasn't joking, and when she wondered if he was feeling unwell, the protagonist pointed out that she was free to refuse his proposition. With that being said, Yahello stated that she will take his life if he doesn't keep his promise. With that being said, he asked her if she will depart right away, which she angrily confirmed, stating that she had to find a solution for the mess that he had made. Just like that, our hero had earned himself 2 more store currency by overcoming yet another possible death. With that, the protagonist was left relieved, unbothered by the fact that he had lost the position to his little sister. And just as he began to think that there was a way for him to escape his cruel fate, someone pointed out how he truly is trying to live a new life, which was none other than Ganesha Jiwoo called her out for her unwanted presence. And so she apologized before expressing how surprised she was by the recent turn of events. The hero affirmed that it was only natural for him to act as such, seeing how she was in a further position than him. So the explorer affirmed to the hero that his half-sister wasn't related to the House of Eucline, leaving our hero utterly shocked as this trivial detail wasn't part of the story. As the adventurer affirmed once again that the hero's sister wasn't related to the noble house, the man was left blown away, as despite knowing that they were not blood-related, he was still shocked to see that she didn't belong to his house, as he hadn't encountered something similar in the real world. Quickly realizing that it wasn't a sudden drop, seeing how his character had previously asked the adventurer to secretly dust his and his sister's DNA. With that being said, the professor affirmed that this changes nothing, and while Ganesha was left stunned by this response, the protagonist himself was shocked by the existence of such a background. With that being said, the lady stated that she would keep the girl's adoption to herself, and before going on her way, she decided to bring up one final matter. To our hero's shock, Ganesha stated that the 6 snakeheads began to act. The 6 snakeheads were a nefarious organization within the continent, as each one of its leaders had a huge bounty on his head. According to the adventurer, the organization was after the items of the auction house, which is why our hero needed to keep his guard up for his own sake, pointing out how the residents lacked the necessary magical defense, which is why she treats threats with great ease. And so the adventurer left, leaving only a tissue behind, as well as a tired protagonist. The hero was certain that this information was useless for him, seeing how he was only embodying the character, which is why he didn't care about his biographical relationship with Yahello, seeing how the girl would always be Deculane's sibling, and so he decided to hide this fact from the world. Meanwhile, Ganesha was talking to her crew, pointing out how different the professor was, to the point where he seemed like someone else. As she pointed out how he had gained charm, one of her men pointed out how weak she was when faced with male handsomeness. And so the both of them began to argue as it slowly escalated, while the professor's fiance's relative, Rayleigh from the Red Garnet adventure team, pointed out how the professor had gained a heart according to the captain. And so Ganesha stated that they could rest easy regarding Deculane, and that she wanted to ask him if he still sought magical slaves, yet indirectly had her answer. With that being said, she suggested that she and her team go back home, before stating that everything they talked about in this meeting must remain a secret. And so the 5 of them held hands in order to activate the spell and quickly go on their way. The next day at our hero's workplace, our hero found himself intrigued in front of the level 1 system store, thinking of how he still lacked the funds to purchase anything in it. The system store was a function that allowed one to empower his avatar as well as any named character. This store could be used rarely, as one would only have a few chances by the end of the second half. This rare usage was due to the shop being accessed once per level, with its fees doubling each time. With that, the hero decided to take his time in order to make the right decision. Jiwoo made it a habit to train his body, spirit, and magic. Yet he was still too weak in front of the great villains inside the game, who, attacking this, decided to quickly gather the lacking funds, as his main goal was improving the quality of his mana. But just then, the door was knocked. Alan entered the protagonist's office, in order to give him something he had just received. The boy asked his master to be wary, as this was recently published in the daily issue of Wizard Journal. The newspaper was warning about a wizard slayer named Lockhart who had escaped prison. This didn't shock our hero, seeing how this character was considered to be the deadliest threat to mage players at the start of the game. But seeing how this would only affect normal mages, the hero decided to pay it no mind, or rather, wished for an encounter, as he was certain of his victory. And so he asked the assistant to rest assured regarding Lockhart, before stating that he would be going to the library and dismissing Alan. But just then, our hero remembered something. He asked the young man if he aimed to become an assistant professor, which he confirmed. But just then, he was left in utter shock, as a surprised scream rang out throughout the entirety of the magic tower, as the one who had told him that he lacked the talent for it now stated that he only wished to see how much he deserved it. But in reality, he was asked for as an assistant. With that being said, Jiwoo gave the young man a bangle with the emblem of his family on it. urging him to keep up the good work. This left Alan deeply thankful. The hero was determined to keep the young man by his side, seeing how talented he was in organizing papers and executing multiple tasks, thinking of how everyone eventually left his character for its cruelty, and how the boy could run off at any moment, seeing how he had endured it all. The protagonist then asked the young man to clock out early before giving him money for dinner, but just as the boy stated that he was being given too much, the professor ignored him and went on his way, leaving him alone to reflect on his own thoughts. Later on at the library reserved for the staff, the hero began to think of how Luna's manuscript was the only reason behind his presence in it, as what he had read on the invention of pure elements had too many errors and blanks that he must fill and correct. Our hero also wished to use this trip in order to find useful manipulation grimoires, but suddenly he asked someone about their presence inside a library exclusive to the staff. This person turned out to be a student who was none other than Lady Elaide. Just like that, the young noble was caught red-handed 10 minutes prior to it. The librarian explained to the professor how the girl needed to access the staff-only reading room for the sake of her studies. The flat noble didn't oppose that, seeing how she was the next head of the Elaide house, giving her free access to the staff-only library. Just like that, the girl was granted permission to browse as she wished. Sylvia adored languages and literature, which is why she aimed to find a book that could satisfy both her passions, and so she had stumbled upon an Ethanel novel written in the language of the extinct fairies, which only made it increase in value. For this sole reason, the girl decided to visit the room that she didn't have access to. It was just then she saw him. To her shock, Decoulain was present in the staff-only library. As he threatened her by using the disciplinary committee, she was left baffled, as this professor was rumored to have never set foot in the library. The young lady explained how she was here for a certain document, and how she was granted access by Professor Relin, making our hero realize that both the professor and the librarian needed to be punished, seeing how they had ignored the school's rules, and so he decided to use magic on the book in order to snatch it from the debutante. As the man called her out for entering the forbidden place for a novel written in fairy language, she was left stunned by his ability to read it before revealing her passions, and so he decided to give her a free pass as he handed her back the book. Yet, he aggressively advised her to send someone to do her bidding next time, unless she wanted to tarnish the name of her house by entering without permission. With that being said, the man left her alone. Sylvia grew frustrated by the humiliation, seeing how she only aimed to understand the fairies by reading books in their natal tongue, which left her amazed at the professor's ability to understand it, seeing how difficult it was to learn this language. Later that day, the students and the professors found themselves in nature. Our hero began to wander as the two professors talked about how at ease their students were in their first practical session in the Mountain of Darkness. This place, which wasn't too far from the Imperial University, is of high importance and under the protection of the Magic Tower, as it is used for educational purposes as well as its abundant magical resources. Due to this, dangerous beasts frequently roam the mountain, forcing the Magic Tower to deploy barriers and regular patrols by a chosen professor. The fat teachers stated to our hero that they needed to choose a professor to stay behind in the mountain this week before asking him if he had anyone in mind. Yet to his surprise, the head professor stated that he would remain, and while the professor assumed that Decoulain was showcasing a model conduct, Jiwoo had other plans in mind, as a new side quest urged him to stay in the mountain, promising a short currency and a prize for his achievements. Upon realizing that a part of the mountain was attracting him, the hero realized that it was the main reason behind his sudden side quest. The game developer was well aware of how terrifying the Mountain of Darkness becomes at night, while the rest of the staff decided to make their leave. 9 hours had passed since then, and exquisite-looking desserts were presented on the table at the cafe near the Magic Tower. The young Luna decided to treat her friends, seeing how she had received a generous sponsorship. Her 3 friends were left overjoyed by the idea of a free dessert. The children then began to discuss how this was their first meeting in advance of their soon-to-come club, as a student was worried about others not joining in. When the mountain training session was brought up, one who was drooling over her dessert stated how 50 participated and how accidents there were common, when suddenly a loud, terrifying noise occurred, leaving everyone startled. Students rushed outside in order to see where this sudden sound came from, and so the young ones ran as fast as they could towards the Mountain of Darkness, the source of the cries for help. Yet to Julie's surprise, one of them didn't stop. The silver-haired student rushed to the scene while her friend tried to warn her about something fishy, but just then, the girl realized and turned around to talk with her friend, only to be met with confusion. Luna found herself in an unknown place after being in the street cafe. But just then she remembered that someone needed rescue upon hearing their cries, and so she screamed to the person to pinpoint their location. With that, the girl rushed to the person needing help, when suddenly the said lady began to bleed in front of the debutante's eyes. To her utter shock, the lady screamed in pain upon being suddenly injured, and so the student prepared herself, assuming that they were under attack, when suddenly she noticed as he arrived that the culprit was none other than the head professor himself, and so she angrily demanded an explanation, seeing how he had attacked a regular person. But the protagonist asked her to look at it well, as this creature wasn't human. Just then, a terrifying beast appeared where the injured woman was, and while the little one was that confused, her teacher explained how she was the victim of illusions, a common trick used among demons. With that being said, the professor decided to get the girl out of the battlefield, leaving him to face the gigantic demon alone. With that being said, our hero decided to slay his foe. Ji-woo realized that the demon must be angry, seeing how he had saved the girl from his claws. With that being said, the quick monster began to move. Just like that, we see a fierce battle between a hunter and a predator. The monster charged at our hero and knocked him back using his powerful horns. Yet this wouldn't be enough to discourage the game developer. The hero also quickly deduced that the core on the monster's head meant that he was specialized in mind tricks, yet this wouldn't affect him due to his resolve. Just then the character's lineage filled the protagonist with an unyielding rage. The attribute Eucline of rank lineage makes our hero more hostile towards demons and increases his purified mana whenever he faces one. The character's long demon-hunting bloodline, a desire to exterminate demonic kind similar to his ancestors, had now appeared in Decoline. Just like that, the protagonist found himself with an unholy wrath. As the demon charged at him, he counterattacked with a flying metal shard. Just like that, one of them began to bleed. With that, our hero had completed his side quest and slain his first demon, as well as earning him his family attribute and 2 store currencies. Ji-woo couldn't tell, but was disgusted by the creature in its last moments. But he was well aware that its appearance marked the beginning of something far worse. Just like that, the event known as the game without the player had begun. It was now morning. Someone began to open their eyes to the pure lights of dawn. Luna woke up screaming and startled. The nurse then decided to explain the situation to the young girl who woke up confused. So she explained how she had lost consciousness last night after falling for the mind tricks of a demon that appeared in the mountain, before stating that she was found and brought here while the mountain had been closed and under investigation due to the appearance of the demon. But the girl grew particularly annoyed upon learning that the man she hated was in fact her savior. It was then revealed that the girl had slept 36 hours, which meant that it was now Wednesday. This left the girl in panic, as it meant that she was running late. Later, all students looked intrigued. As their classmate arrived exhausted to class at the last second, Julia quickly greeted her silver-haired friend before checking on her. So Luna affirmed that she was well rested after sleeping for 36 hours. Seeing the material on their desks, the girl assumed that she must have missed something in the last session, but her friend affirmed that she was just as clueless. With that being said, the hero arrived with his assistant. The girl wondered about the young man's identity, and so before beginning his lecture, the head professor introduced Alan as his assistant professor, which intrigued the whispering students, seeing how Decoline was rumored to work alone, as this teacher wasn't the one who would give someone such a prestigious position that greatly boosts one's survey. This made Ephraim come to a realization, as her father never got the position, which is why he died as a researcher, which left her more intrigued seeing how the man she hated so much had recruited an unknown mage. The assistant then began to hand the students timers as the professor explained how they had 3 hours to complete the task of the practical lecture. According to the girl, the bracelet on her wrist was her father's legacy that always made her wonder about his relationship with her professor who didn't let him promote, and about the reason the cold man began to act nicely. Ephraim tried her best to focus on the task at hand, yet simply couldn't, seeing how distracted her mind was. Suddenly she was snapped back to reality by a student who finished the assignment in less than half an hour. All were left amazed by this unexpected feat, as it was no other than the Ilad prodigy. Yet the girl looked uneasy as the professor examined her work. Yet upon seeing how he dismissed her after praising her work, she quickly got up with a cheerful smile, before turning her gaze to her rival and giving her a smug look that left her irritated. With that being said, Lady Luna rushed to complete the assignment. Shortly after, one by one, the students began to leave. The class was slowly getting emptier, until in the end only one student remained. Ephraim lost all hope of completing the assignment, and so she desperately tried to come up with a solution. The student couldn't be more irritated, as on top of being surpassed by her rival, all the other students had already completed the assignment. This also made her question her own talents, seeing how she was struggling with such a simple task, and so she decided to get up from her desk, giving up on the task at hand, stating that she couldn't get her revenge due to her poor educational background. When suddenly someone stated that she had been here for almost 6 hours, the professor asked her if she was going to make him stay in the class any longer. Efferine Luna was utterly baffled to see that her teacher was still in the class with her. She then apologized as the man called her out for missing the time limit because of panic and anxiety, and so he affirmed to her that even if she is the subject of mockery or surpassed, or perhaps in front of the person that she despises the most, which left her quite alarmed, the protagonist affirmed that one must keep a cool head and always be ready to calculate. With that being said, the head professor headed towards the door, stating that the lady could never rival him with such a mindset, before expressing his disappointment, claiming that he had overestimated her abilities. With that being said, the talented one was left alone in the class. She then began to think of her incomplete task, and now more determined than ever, she regained her seat, recalling the hurtful words of her teacher. Frustration was slowly building up until she finally let it all out, and so she began casting a spell, stating that she didn't care about the fact that our hero was disappointed and her blood began to come out of her nose. She was now more determined than ever to achieve her dream regardless of the obstacles ahead. Meanwhile, our hero outside of class assumed that this wouldn't cause a big issue. Seeing how our hero desperately needed the student to get stronger, he had wasted 6 hours of his life waiting with her in the class, as the recent event in the Mountain of Darkness made him realize that the main quest was soon to start, and when it will begin strong and well synchronized, named characters will begin to appear, with one of their strongest being Lady Luna. The girl was bound to quickly evolve after overcoming her lack of magic instincts, as well as her weak mentality. Dekaline was ready to quickly react if the girl's quick development would put him in danger. According to the protagonist, only lazy people believed in fate while he only relied on himself. He was also well aware that his character would never allow a struggling newbie to catch up. Just then, the girl opened the door and calmly walked away without uttering a word. Our hero entered the classroom and was met by a great result. Upon seeing this, he pointed out how it took the girl more than 6 hours to complete the assignment, and that she possessed all the weaknesses of someone who didn't attend the academy. But despite it all, the quality of her work was worthy of the best, and just like that, our hero completed yet another side quest with his work being done at the Magic Tower. Our hero decided to head back home, only to stumble upon an acquaintance. To our hero's utter shock, a smiling Zeit stood right in front of him. This greatly annoyed our hero, as Zeit von Bruggen-Freyden was the current head of his family and his fiancée's older brother. This man was even the one who insisted on the union of Julia and Dekaline in the first place. But the most trivial part was the fact that he was currently the third strongest fighter and was renowned for his great power, leaving our hero intrigued by their meeting. He then began to assume that his presence was due to the brushes ore that he had won at the auction over his fiancée. This made a chill run down Jiwoo's spine, as if this man would attempt to take his life. He would have no way of defending himself. Zeit explained how anxious he was because of the rumor regarding the bad relationship of the professor with his sister. Our hero felt relieved, as the man was still not aggressive towards him, seeing how he had invited him to dinner this week, and just as the protagonist was about to accept, he was interrupted by a hand placed on his shoulder. Zeit stated that he was happy to see the man quickly accept, and that he had tailor-made the menu in order to suit his taste, and that he will be to blame if he didn't like it. With that being said, the man bid an ominous farewell to his future brother-in-law before going on his way, leaving the protagonist baffled by how he didn't have the chance to decline the invitation. But then he corrected himself, stating that he was forced to accept. The professor feared troubling Zeit, who valued his family name over everything else. Just like that, our hero was forcefully invited to dinner. The next day, a big dispute emerged at the Freyden household. Julie claimed that her and her fiancé despised each other and that she didn't have time for dinner due to her training with the knights. This made her brother assume that she was just in a bad mood after losing the snowflare stone to her fiancé. Yet she angrily affirmed that it wasn't the case. A man with long black hair watched from afar as the siblings argued with each other. At one point, the brother stated that the man must have taken the orb in order to create a weapon. So the sister burst out, stating that if she was to be gifted a sword, she shall immediately leave him. Upon hearing this, the brother grew angry, and so he demonstrated his ominous aura as he demanded his startled little sister to think again. He then affirmed to her once again that love wasn't present in politics and that leaving her promised one would be an act of stupidity. Zeit assumed that his sister must have developed a crush for another man or she was being courted by someone else, yet she affirmed that it wasn't the case. Julie then denied being concerned about her fiancé's wealth or reputation, leaving her brother even more intrigued. In the end, the older brother stated that his sister should come in time and that he would help her settle any possible issue at hand. With that being said, The head of the household had left. Frustration began to build up in Julie's heart, and so she drew out her sword before letting it all out on the training dummy. Just like that, it was incinerated. As the magic began to dissipate, someone called Julie out for her blades filled with frustration, which was none other than Veron, a knight that worked under her. The lady apologized for bursting out in such a barbaric way in front of him, yet he affirmed that there was no need before stating that he understood her, seeing how despicable her fiancé is, and that she should have been paired with someone better, but was quickly silenced. Julie reminded him that a knight shouldn't badmouth others while they are absent, before turning to Veron and asking him to not commit a crime for her sake, with true eyes and a soft smile. Seeing this left the knight with mixed feelings. With that being said, Julie asked her subordinate to prepare himself as she was going back. A silent, wretched hate dwelled secretly inside Veron. After looking at the one that he serves, he affirmed to himself that he had the salvation for her problems, and that it will showcase his loyalty towards her, as this was a task only he could accomplish. Veron was determined to make Julie happy. Later that night at the Birch Assembly of Elders, discussions were being made about the demon who spawned in the Mountain of Darkness, and how magic was created in order to slay demons, along with how they must act, seeing how the threat had resurfaced once again. Then the old man demanded to send letters to the 12 mages, seeing how he summoned them to his tower. Yet the carriage carrying the professor had been miraculously stopped from falling. In conclusion, both professor and knight did their best to ensure everyone's safety, yet only the professor had survived. The man was then thanked for his explanation by the knight captain, who stood saddened along with her order, as the knights asked if they could bring anything back with them, and the man, pointing out how crimes here were forced to stay unpunished. Julie walked away and stood at the edge of the cliff, thinking of how she had lost such a trustworthy subordinate for such a meaningless reason. In the end, the captain of the Knight Order couldn't help but see the late Veron as a fool. Meanwhile, at our hero's residence, his name was being screamed in anger. His younger sister burst out at him for taking yet another loan on the family's fortune as the servant tried to calm her down, and so she angrily pointed out once again how money was currently tight, and that they were on the brink of ruin if nothing is done in these 2 months. This made him realize what happens when he writes a check, as the fee for his wand was surprisingly high as he decided to act in order to save the family, and so he affirmed to his half-sister that he had found a solution in order to make profits. Shortly after, the Eucline siblings found themselves in a room full of treasures. This intrigued the young one, seeing how these were all items that her brother had mindlessly bought at the auction, so he asked her to have patience and to speak in a noble way as she was the next head of the house. This left her quite angered, seeing how he called her out for her behavior, despite wasting their family's fortune. Despite being unaware of the reason at the beginning, the hero had assumed that the items from the auction that activated his wealth magnet were some kind of investment, but on his last trip, he had thought of a way to use them to make profit, and so he used his skill Midas touch on the vase. Yet seeing how her brother stood still with his hand on the item, the girl assumed her older brother to be a fool. The protagonist then demanded an appraiser, as to his sister's shock he was about to place the item in auction once again. This triggered the lady, seeing how ancient items should be preserved, and that he would surely lose even more money, before bursting out upon being silenced. The professor then quickly ordered his servant Roy to summon the appraiser and have the antiquities transferred. Our hero then turned to the item that had become the vase of the Eastern Master Craftsman that was upgraded by our hero's skill, giving him the power to maintain and evolve the flower inside it. Just like that, the vase became an item so precious that he almost didn't want to use it in order to make profit. Upon seeing her brother proceed, the worried lady asked him if he truly wanted to make them lose the rest of their money, yet he asked her to not worry about it before ditching her to go to work. Shortly after, at the academy, at the Magic Exploration Club room, the students were playing with cards. Ephraim Luna placed her hand on the table, giving her the 3rd win in a row, as well as sparing her cleaning duties for the week. The students seemed to be having fun, especially the young girl who felt as if she was living a fantasy, seeing how upon entering the school she was constantly being bullied for being the lowest of the nobles and for not having attended the academy. She was even being harassed by teachers and students alike. The girl found herself facing numerous hardships, yet now she was inside a club alongside loved ones. Ephraim then explained how amazing it was to be part of the ordinary Magic Exploration Club, but as the students began to discuss the name, an angry person barged into the room and immediately began to scream at them. One of the teachers reported to the fat professor how the commoners were taking up space by establishing a useless club. Lady Luna was now in front of Beck and Professor Relin, who greatly despised commoners. Relin then began to mock the name of the club. The girl decided to handle this expected and unappreciated visit with a cool head, and so she explained to the staff how they had submitted the necessary documents and how they were a legal club. Relin began to scream scream, demanding to know who had allowed them to gather like this, before recognizing Luna as the miserable one that was subjugated to the disciplinary committee. This insult greatly angered the girl. Her dark gazes were then brought up to the professor's attention, and so he demanded that she stop them at once while her friend tried to calm her down. Meanwhile, the excited Beck began to laugh in secret. Relin was certain that none of the professors would have signed the necessary paper in order to allow them to initiate the club, and upon seeing the young one shocked, he assumed that his assumption was right. But in reality, the one that allowed the club to exist stood right behind him. The protagonist asked the fat one if he truly opposed his decision. With the arrival of the professor, Ephorine Luna was left alarmed upon arriving. The hero revealed that he was the one behind the club before asking his co-worker if he had anything to say to him. Deculane, who saw how the man was screaming for the professor that allowed the club to be created, asked the man if he needed his opinion in order to do so. Our hero was greatly annoyed, as by running off from the problem at his household, he stumbled upon even more issues at work. The germaphobe was even more angry by how sweaty the man was as he tried to come up with an excuse. Relin then pointed out how the room was empty, claiming that he had only burst out of anger upon seeing how the young students lacked the necessary equipment, before stating that he would take it upon himself in order to give them to the newly uniformed club. For the protagonist affirmed that such kindness was expected from Raylan, who was left quite anxious. Our hero then turned his gaze to the startled Beck, explaining that those who are acquainted with scams shall become like them, before leaving the scene, leaving Beck utterly frustrated. Later that same day, the students were discussing how their teacher had been absent due to the recent events of the Mage Summit. They also discussed the mysterious train incident. With that being said, the hero decided to turn the attention of the students towards him. As he would now begin the lesson, Deculane explained how he would be teaching them about the pure elements and the interference with magic. Magic interference referred to a phenomenon where one mage invades another's magic. The teacher decided to proceed with a practical exercise before aboard the theory. With a snap of his finger, the items within the box began to levitate. After levitating them all into the air, a stone was placed in front of each student. The teacher explained how each of these stones had a worth of 3,000 ellen, and how his students were tasked with getting it from him by interrupting his telekinesis. The greedy Ephorine Luna was left overexcited. Upon learning that they get to keep the crystal if they manage to snatch it away, Julia had no choice but to quickly silence her. With that being said, the annoyed professor explained how it was better to stop the spell rather than just getting tangled with it. With that being said, the students began their assignment. The class was plunged in silence as all were left focused. Despite having levitated an entire train, the hero decided to practice the beginner-level telekinesis that he had memorized even more. This also left him wondering how his magic would resist the interference of numerous mages, especially that two of these mages were in fact some of the greatest prodigies. Lady Luna, who had almost exhausted her sponsorship due to necessary expenses, felt thankful towards our hero for granting them an expensive magic stone. At the same time, Sylvia looked at her rival, recalling how her professor stated that she learned by herself, leaving her quite irritated. Lady Elad was determined to finish the assignment before Ephorine. The students struggled to free the crystals from their teacher's grasp. Yet to no effect, Alan then praised his teacher, as despite going up against countless mages, he stood his ground without breaking a sweat. Yet in reality, our hero was also exhausted, seeing how he didn't expect the students, despite their best, to struggle this much in completing the assignment. When suddenly one of the magical stones began to waver, leaving our hero alerted. The culprit was none other than Sylvia, who quickly turned her gaze to her rival, thinking she'd be satisfied seeing how she had finished before Ephorine. The professor quickly praised her for being the first to complete the assignment. With that being said, the young lady quickly adjusted her composure. Lady Elade's success was no surprise to our protagonist. As he wondered if any other mage had completed the assignment, he was only met with the sounds of struggle. And just as he was about to lose all hope, Sylvia was left startled seeing how another student managed to snatch the magical stone away. Just like that, the fallen noble acquired an expensive item, leaving her rival rather frustrated, seeing how the students struggled to complete the task. The hero decided to put an end to their efforts, as he was left disappointed by the weakness of his students, whom he asked to clean after themselves. During the break, Julia asked her friend about how she completed the task, yet Ephorine, who couldn't speak clearly anymore, affirmed that she struggled too as well. To her friend's shock, Lady Luna claimed that she had come to a realization Sylvia watched from afar as Ephorine explained to Julia how she had broken through the telekinesis. Despite not having too much knowledge about this field, she was utterly baffled seeing how her rival, who was the last in the class, had suddenly risen up to the second spot, making her assume that she was being helped. This made her assume that the rumors about her getting a hand from the professor weren't lies. meaning that the sad teacher had lied to her. Sylvia couldn't find anything special with Ephorine Luna, and instead looked at her as someone tainted with pride. With the break being over, the lecture resumes, the teacher explaining how there is an easier way for the students to break his delicacies, and that those who had succeeded in the previous exercise might have a slight idea of the new notion, as this was the true mana interference. As unlike the most used method, it requires one to corrupt a spell from the opponent that he understands. Yet it was rarely used due to the fact that one must be very knowledgeable of the magic circles in order to use it. The professor explained how this method could only affect the spells known by the caster, while defensive magic and barriers are more commonly used, before stating that sacrifices needed to be made so they could master this method. In order for this method to work, one must interfere with the central circuit of the magic circle, which mostly depends on the element and the type of magic. To sum it up, if the students manage to correctly figure out the central circuit, they will be able to use the mana interference in order to counter magic. Deculane then decided to reveal to them the secret that allows one to correctly identify the central circuit of most magic circles, before giving his Stormblade All spell as an example, stating that offensive spells will always be activated from the inside out, before addressing the subject of support magic. And after 2 hours, as he was about to commence the next subject, he decided to give the rest of the lecture for the students to understand alone, seeing how they had run out of time due to their own weakness, before informing them that they will have one practical before the soon-to-come midterms and asking them to remember this lecture well. With that, the class had been dismissed. As he left the classroom, the students began to complain about the huge workload that was given to them by the professor. Julia and her friends weren't different. Yet, Ephorine Luna couldn't help but feel happy, seeing how she had come to a realization, while suddenly a mocking presence approached her, which was no other than Beck. Julia asked the boy if he truly wanted to annoy them once again, seeing how he was, as always, causing trouble for them, like when he called Professor Rellin their club. Beck affirmed that he was revolted by them standing out too much despite their status before asking the commoner prodigy about her sudden growth. And just as she was about to ignore him, she was left stunned upon hearing how he claimed that a fallen noble like her was too poor to bribe the professor, and so she demanded that he repeat the words that he had spoken. Beck affirmed that everyone was already aware that she was getting help from the professor, and so she loudly denied the claim. Yet the boy stated that this was the only explanation for her sudden growth, despite not having attended the academy. He even claimed that the protagonist didn't use his full power on her magic stone in order to let her win, and that he had pity on her, seeing how she was a homeless orphan. Ephorine Luna was about to explode, and just as more and more tension was building up between the aristocrat and the fallen noble, and Sylvia was watching from afar, someone pulled the girl's shirt. Julia asked her to drop the matter, pointing out the risk to be sent to the disciplinary committee once again. This made her recall the words of Deculane regarding how mages should keep a cool head. With that being said, the prodigy stood silent for a moment, before thanking her friend for calming her down. Beck was left irritated as she explained how she had lost her temper trying to have a conversation with someone as dumb as him. With that being said, the two girls went to fetch something to eat, leaving while ignoring the young aristocrat. As they happily ran out of the class, Sylvia watched, intrigued. Later that day, a girl was filled with frustration. Despite her friend calming her down at the moment, Ephorine Luna was still irritated by Beck, and just as she was talking to herself, thinking about the arrogant boy, she was left shocked after stumbling upon her rival. Sylvia wanted to have a conversation with her, and stated that it wouldn't take long. The intrigued Ephorine stated that she should get lost, seeing how she wasn't in the mood for conflict, but intriguement was replaced by anger as her rival asked her if the rumors were true. The angry girl burst out at Sylvia and affirmed that the rumors were obviously false, seeing how she despised Professor Deculane. Lady Alad assumed that her enraged rival wasn't lying, and so she decided to drop the matter, leaving her even more irritated before deciding to enlighten her regarding their professor, who hadn't entered a lab after Ephorine Luna's parent had died 3 years ago, which didn't surprise the fallen noble, seeing how her prodigy of a father was the reason behind the professor's success in the first place. But to her utter shock, it was revealed that for the last 3 months, the protagonist had been frequenting the lab on a daily basis. According to Sylvia, a new assistant was picked, as well as a new magical tool, further newly cleaned lab. This made the girl fear the worst, assuming that the protagonist was trying to steal the unfinished lifework of her father, but yet still had her doubts about his ability to complete it. This left her filled with frustration, yet decided to maintain her composure to her rival's surprise, stating that the matter didn't concern her, but the professor. A small smile formed on Sylvia's lips, and so she made her exit, stating that she had assumed that the fallen noble wasn't aware of what was truly happening, leaving the prodigy to reflect on her dark thoughts. Days had now passed, and the day for our hero's lesson had arrived. All the students were gathered outside of class. The girls began to wonder about the nature of the practical lesson that the professor would be giving, when suddenly Beck bumped into Julia and casually continued his way, leaving only her friend to try and calm her down. Just then the professor arrived, declaring the start of the lesson, reminding them that this would be their last session before their midterms, before revealing the subject of the lecture by unveiling the immense crowd and explaining that today's lesson would be held in public. The number of viewers left the two girls intimidated. Deculain explained how his students were engaged in magical combats inside this arena. They were free to use any magic they desired, but must use at least 3 elements. Jiwoo won't care about the outcome of the fight, but its progress instead, in order to assess each student and asking them to use this lecture for their own growth, and declaring that his colleague would be watching the fights closely in order to avoid any of them being harmed. With that, the protagonist called up a student named Yurazan for the first fight before asking him to choose his opponent. As the two students took their places inside the arena, the first fight of the practical lecture had begun. All fights were going well. The students were immersed in the lesson, while each of the teachers focused on his respective task. Despite how odd the young ones felt at first, they slowly began to adapt their magic for the sake of the battle. A little while later, a great explosion occurred, marking the victory of Lady Illid. Ephraim heard Beck and his friend mocking the commoner for losing so measurably, which she didn't find fair, since they themselves were nothing compared to her rival. And despite his defeat, she began to praise her friend Parrot for his good work. With that being said, came as it turned off the pretentious aristocrat to choose his adversary. After thinking for a while, he designated the fallen noble, leaving her very pleased. As the two of them took their places in the arena, Beck began to mock his adversary, stating that she would have no one to help her behind the scenes in this fight, leaving Lady Luna very annoyed by his rudeness and ill manners, before calling him out for his failed attempt to imitate their professor's appearance. Ephraim was also determined to show him how pitiful his magical talent was, as well as she charged up her spell, and so the two of them charged at each other. Beck claimed that he would send her to the afterlife before launching a spell that caught the girl off guard, dragging her off on the floor to everyone's horror. And while the boy assumed that he had achieved victory, his spell began to behave oddly. Just then, the golden color of his magic had been turned to green. The girl, who had taken control over his spell, stated that she recalled an old saying after entering university, one that states that aristocrats should be beaten beautifully before launching Beck's attack back at him. Just like that, the boy had been knocked into the air, to Julia's amazement, who stipulated that there was no such saying. The boy was left unable to fight when a shadow came hovering over him. The prodigy asked him about the taste of a defeat served by a fallen noble like her. Just like that, Beck had been defeated. The professor then pointed out how the audience only had a quick show due to the boy's inability to keep on the fight. Just then, the prodigy demanded to fight once again, stating to her defeated opponent's annoyance that she didn't have the chance to showcase the 3 required pure elements due to his weakness. This reasoning made sense to the man as he asked her to choose her next adversary from those present in the arena. Ephraim pointed to our hero, as she challenged him to magical combat. Everyone present, and especially the fat professor, were revolted by the idea. While the curious Sylvia waited in silence to see what would happen, Ephraim wasn't surprised by everyone's predictable reaction. Yet she was ready to be treated as a madwoman if it would allow her to have her long-awaited fight with her father's enemy. The protagonist smirked and calmed his colleague who was making a fuss before accepting his student's challenge. The protagonist stated that there were no rules against her proposal, seeing how she was asked to choose an adversary from those present in the arena. Yet, seeing how they were leagues apart, he would be giving her the first move before stating that she would achieve victory by making him move. Just like that, student found herself facing teacher. Ephraim Luna was filled with excitement, as this was something she had longed for, which was a chance to fight Deculain, who announced the start of the match. The girl immediately launched the first attack, and despite knowing that she was currently unable to defeat someone as powerful as him, she wanted to use this chance in order to see the gap that currently exists between the two of them. The prodigy then launched a fire attack that surprised the teacher. This scenery quite pleased him, yet he stood unfazed in the face of the fire. But the prodigy wasn't done yet, as she decided to use an earth spell as well. Smoke covered the battleground as she managed to trap the protagonist in a dome of fire. All were left amazed by her performance. But just then the sphere began to crack, revealing an unfazed and unscratched Deculain, leaving her utterly annoyed. With that being said, she decided to cast yet another offensive spell, But the man, who easily stopped them, pointed out that Ephorine had a bad habit that becomes more and more problematic as her mana input increases, while she was left baffled by his use of magic interference. And so she decided to hit him with another attack, but to her shock, nothing came out. Seeing how she was unable to attack made her assume that the teacher had interfered with her magic circuits. This left the prodigy utterly annoyed, seeing how her opponent managed to forbid her from casting any spell. But despite the inconvenience, she wasn't ready to give up just yet, and she charged at the man, thinking of how she was more at ease when it came to physical combat. Yet the simple gesture of his fingers, the protagonist managed to fling her away at an impressive distance, leaving her to crash onto the ground. Our hero remained unfazed, thinking of how the debutante managed to combine 3 elements in order to unleash a powerful attack, pointing out her great talent in magic. Yet even with her talents, one couldn't achieve such results if he didn't have mastery over the elements. Ephorine was able to achieve such a feat due to her attribute vessel, an ability that could make anyone jealous, seeing how it allowed her to wield all the elements by the use of her bracelet. The protagonist then began to think of how envious his character would have been in his place, and how reassuring that a named character like her was evolving. Decollane then approached her, saying that her defeat was now obvious. Yet, then again, he praised her for her good work, to her utter amazement. With that being said, the professor decided to end the lecture in order to let his students prepare for the incoming midterms. The young mages then began to discuss how surprised they were to see how talented the girl was, which wasn't obvious due to her previous easy victory. To her last opponent's annoyance, Ephorine then realized that now no one could doubt her talent, as her friends rushed in to praise her for this great fight. At the same time, the ship that Ganesha was waiting for had arrived. The adventurer quickly greeted Leo and Carlos, but she was particularly happy about seeing Ria once again, before asking her if she had missed her as well. The lady explained that the feeling was mutual, as she was none other than Yuria, an island girl that was now being controlled by the protagonist's old team leader. Upon seeing the girl, Ganesha gave her a tight hug, yet Ria had her mind elsewhere, as a bright light appeared the day it all started. The bright light erased her and her world that day. Upon waking up, everything had changed, as she opened her eyes to see intriguing faces, with the red-haired one talking about how she couldn't accomplish the job, which made her subordinate complain. Just like that, the team leader found herself in front of the characters she had created, as the lady introduced herself and asked the little one if she was Ria. Upon observing those close to her and her surroundings, and realizing that she was truly inside the game, she decided to play along as Yuria, a character that she and the rest of the developers had created. The woman urged the 2 boys to stop running, as she was the finest adventurer in the game, Ganesha. The team leader decided to stay close to her in order to assure her own safety. Ara was determined to find a way back to Earth. Meanwhile, at our hero's residence, his package had finally arrived. The wand that Lokelok had designed for our hero, and that had the ability to stock mana while strengthening its wielder by operating as a side circuit, was now here. Due to his attribute, the man couldn't help but find the wand magnificent, as it had the properties of the fine material that was ironwood, which it was made of, while strengthening the user and automatically matching his outfit. The hero was impressed by the item's traits. At first, he assumed that the fee to create such an item was that little bit pricey, but upon receiving it, he realized that the price matched the quality. Just then, the servant informed the master that his meal was ready. Shortly after, our hero found himself in front of a great variety of plates, decorated with the most exquisite cuisine, leaving him intrigued. Decollane pointed out how money was currently tight before expressing his intriguement in front of this fancy dinner, so his sister explained how this was a motivation. According to Roy, the auction that they had held went quite well, to the point where they faced some issues seeing how wanted the exposed items were. Neither he nor the lady could believe it, seeing how they had enough money to take care of the household for a long time. Roy then explained that our hero's half-sister was trying to showcase her gratitude by presenting him this exquisite dinner. And so he cracked a soft smile, before stating how delicious it was. Yet the lady decided to pretend as if she wasn't pleased by the compliment. And so both Eucline siblings enjoyed dinner together, until the eldest son called out his little sister for her poor handling of the knife. Shortly after, in the hero's office, as he reviewed some old papers, he was left displeased, making him curse his character. Jiwoo decided to do his best regarding the midterm exam, and so he opted to look at the old copies of Deculine's inspiration regarding his own paper, but was left frustrated seeing how debutantes could never pass such exams. Upon reading the paper, the protagonist could only feel how his character was just trying to showcase how superior he was compared to his students. Just looking at the old exams gave him a good picture of how despicable of a person his character was, and that he made the copies this difficult on purpose, thinking that his students' inability to pass would demonstrate his greatness. So our hero wished to be different and give his students a proper exam, as he aimed to submit questions difficult to answer, yet let the student be happy for himself upon solving it. The protagonist was well aware that his role as a teacher bound each of his actions to the progress of his students, and so he decided to look into the last box in order to find anything valuable. Upon taking a look at the paper, he was left totally amazed, seeing how much different it was from the other papers, making him realize that his character wasn't the one to put the questions there, as despite being difficult, the questions were still objects of interest. With that being said, he decided to use comprehension on the questions and place their solution into the magic exam purpose paper. Suddenly, colorful magic emerged from the paper, quickly filling our hero's office. In the end, as a figure appeared, the professor was left amazed, seeing how an illustration would be created once the exam is passed. The hero began to think of how the elements had been perfectly used, which could leave anyone impressed. Yet upon admitting that this was the best copy for the subject that he teaches, his body was invaded by an unconscious envy, as Deculain himself wouldn't be able to deny how great the questions were. Despite the fact that he wasn't the one who had created them, yet only one question remained unanswered, as the protagonist was unable to identify the figure in front of him. Meanwhile, the letter from Dezekdun, the Berkt Elder, explained that the file of the red film race will be reopened in the next meeting, which piqued the lady's interest upon seeing the unexpected turn of events regarding this matter, due to an individual strongly supporting this race. The chairwoman explained how surprised she was by our hero as he took the defending side, before turning to the other professors who were with her in the room. Adeline, the chairwoman of the Magic Tower at the Imperial University, was well known for her great power, as she was the closest to an archmage position, yet she surprisingly had a carefree personality. The chairwoman hid behind the wall, watched in silence as the students whispered, yet this passion for secrets and gossip was due to her origins, seeing how her carefree personality and powerful magic resulted from her fairy heritage. And despite pretending to complain about such events, they actually filled her with excitement. The professors were doing their monthly meeting with the chairwoman. Our hero's character was usually the discussed topic, and he always replied by denying his desire for attention. Yet this time, he wasn't here to defend himself. Just then, one of the professors surprised the chairwoman by informing her that Lady Luina had been seen at the last Mage Council meeting. The lady was now residing in the kingdom in question, competed with our hero for the position of head professor, and lost due to his dirty tricks. Adeline asked about the woman suddenly returning to the Empire, so the teacher explained how it was natural, seeing how she was promised a position, before pointing out how the university will greatly benefit from her, seeing all the good she had accomplished in the kingdom. The teacher expressed doubts regarding the current head professor who defended the Bloodshroud race. As the chairwoman pointed out that she will consider giving the position to Luina, all were left glad. With that being said, she dispersed the meeting before urging the professors to submit their exam questions. She began to think of how Deculain was acting against his nature, and decided to tease him a bit, seeing how he must have had help creating these questions, which were too well chosen for his level. And the simple thought of his life returning to the Imperial University filled the chairwoman with excitement. The day of the midterm exams of our hero's subject had dawned, and the students began to complain about how surprising and difficult their exam was. Alan reassured them by stating that despite how odd the exam was, everything was explained, as they had 10 days to complete the exam, which meant that it would be over at midnight of the next Sunday. According to the assistant, the students would each take the exam in an assigned room, that they were free to leave and enter whenever they wanted without their papers, and that they had the freedom of using the books. Hearing this made Julia fear the worst, while her friend began to complain about how odd everything their teacher did was. The assistant then stated that the professor claimed that he will write a letter of recommendation using his title to the one who completes his exam without any mistakes, leaving them all quite shocked, seeing how greatly important the said recommendation letter was. Mages were reported into 11 ranks, ranging from debutantes to eternals, and promotion was something almost impossible, as in order for one to rise through the ranks, he must pass a promotion exam. Yet the said exams were quite difficult, but a recommendation letter from the head professor could even guarantee a rank 4 monarch a promotion. Yet this didn't interest Ephraim Luna the slightest, as she couldn't care less for a recommendation letter from her father's enemy. But just then she realized that if she actually managed to get her hands on it, it could be considered as some kind of victory over Deculain himself. This filled her with excitement, as she was now more determined than ever to ace the test, before letting out a small evil laugh that confused her friend. 4 days into the exam, and the prodigy found herself struggling, as despite all of her work, the questions kept on getting more and more difficult. Yet she couldn't help but acknowledge the ingenuity of these questions. Ephraim began to doubt that those were Deculain's questions, as despite being challenging, each resolved one gave her a sense of enlightenment. and despite how much it pained her to do so, she had no choice but to admit how fun the test was. The fallen noble, once determined to get the recommendation letter from the enemy of her father, when she stumbled upon a question that she didn't quite understand, and so she decided to go outside in order to take a short break. Sylvia was sitting on a bench, unable to believe that it took her more than a day to just solve a single question, which is why she decided to take a break. After recalling the words of the assistant professor, she began to think of how the recommendation letter was pointless, seeing how their midterm is far harder than any promotion exam. Lady Iliad truly wanted to ace the test for her own sake, as each question was unique and magnificent, with a form of revelation unveiling upon being solved. This made her certain that it would help her become a better mage. When suddenly she was approached by none other than her rival. This made her wonder about how many questions she had solved. Yet as the two girls began to ask the same question, they quickly shut up. Sylvia revealed that she was now at question 8, which shocked the fallen noble, who assumed that her rival had solved 8 questions, so she clarified by stipulating that the last one was a work in progress. Ephorine Luna then claimed to be unable to answer question 7, making Lady Iliad wonder if she was telling the truth, yet she decided to drop the matter in order to focus on the test. And while Ephorine assumed that her arrival bothered the girl, she simply explained how her break was now over. Later that night, at our hero's residence, as his students were plunged into their exams, he felt as if a colossal change was soon to happen, as Emperor Krebeim was on the brink of death. After reading this, the man began to think of how the ruler was a kind person, which is why his reign was characterized by a balance between divine and political influences, and did not discriminate against the red film race. But the main problem was the one who was to be his successor, as he was the most important in the game, which could cause some trouble, as it was no other than Sophane Yekatere August von Gebern, who would bring a big change along with his era that is yet to come. Meanwhile, the sun was setting on the university. The 10th day of the exam had arrived, and many students decided to give up on our hero's tricky questions. But this also made the gap between the talented students and the normal ones clear, as regardless of the results, some of them took pride in themselves for trying to solve this exam. The students even began to talk about what they had learned at the end of the exam period, piquing everyone's interest, to the point where even the professors decided to take a look at the paper of the protagonist. With that being said, only the two prodigies were left trying to solve the 8th and last question. Ephorine Luna was determined to solve the last question, regardless of its astonishing difficulty, thinking that she had drunk too much coffee to back down just now, and just as she deduced, she would certainly find the solution if she kept on trying. A bright light suddenly appeared, shocking the professor and his assistant, making them realize that a student managed to solve question number 8. Our hero already knew that this particular student would be the one to solve it. And so he opened the door and entered the room, before closing it and affirming that he had full faith in this student's success, as it was none other than Lady Iliad, who filled the room with the image of her success, as the bright colors were made from the elements. This image of a light painted in the darkness was the perfect representation of the balance between cool and warmth, something that our protagonist couldn't deny its beauty. Despite being the one behind these questions, he himself couldn't bring out this much of their beauty. A part of the Jiwoo who lacked the talent to accomplish his artistical dream could also be found within this exam. Yet that same person, its goddess, decided to keep on chasing after art in order to touch people's hearts. The character who loved beauty could also be found within these questions, which is why both Deculaean, who adored aesthetics, and the protagonist, who wanted to become an artist, were both pleased by the scenery in front of them. The teacher then praised the student for her good work, before expressing his gratitude and leaving the room, leaving her shocked to reflect on what just happened. In reality, the girl also wanted to express her gratitude as she touched her own spell, recalling how she was always under pressure due to her magical heritage, assuming that it was the reason behind the success of this spell. But she quickly ditched the idea, as the reason behind her success was the magnificence of magic itself. Shortly after, in another room, the assistant informed the prodigy that the exam was finished, leaving her no choice but to accept defeat. Alan praised her for her good work, seeing her and another student were the only ones who tried to solve the last question, making her realize that her rival had succeeded, leaving her ultimately envious of her great potential. This also made the fallen noble think, as she had realized that obtaining the recommendation letter from the enemy of her father wasn't of importance to her anymore, as in the end only her thirst for knowledge and instincts as a magician remained. Lady Luna desired to finish the test like her rival. To the assistant's surprise, the girl stated that the copy was still in front of her despite it being the end of the test. Upon seeing how she wanted to crack question number 8 before letting out a wide smile, the assistant couldn't help but feel happy as he wished her back, stating that he will be supporting her. Later that night, the girl found herself walking tired. The 10-day exam had left her exhausted, as she began to think that scoring full marks had surely replenished her energy. and that only one thing awaited her arrival, which was an uncomfortable bed, as well as a door painted with insults. When suddenly 3 shadows arrived and called out the girl, Ephraim was shocked to see her friend group, as Julia explained how it was the tradition to decompress from the exam together. She suggested that Ephraim have a meal with them. Upon hearing this, tears of happiness began to drop from the exhausted prodigy, making Julia call her out on the ridiculous expression that was on her face. The red-haired one then cracked a soft smile before claiming that Ephraim will be the one paying for their food, as she was the reason behind their late stay on campus, leaving her absolutely startled. The next day, our hero finally organized the items that he had purchased at the auction. The hero decided to keep with him the Rufarin ring and the ancient true necklace that helps with the mana, and storing the rest in a safe like Ganesha suggested. Yet one issue remained at hand, as the precious ore wouldn't bend to our protagonist's will, as despite expecting the task at hand to be rather challenging, he didn't expect the stone to be known to historic Anesis. This made the professor assume that the stone that he could only admire, seeing how expensive it was in-game, was using magic to resist him, and just as he began to think of forcefully reshaping it, an idea suddenly struck his mind. The professor recalled something he had read in the library regarding communion, a phenomenon where one tames a legendary blade. Jiwoo assumed that he should try to understand the weapon itself. With that being said, he reached his hand to the crystal, and upon touching it, was left in pain as he tried to use his attributes on it. After being done, our hero had wasted more than half his mana in order to comprehend 1,000th of the ore, making him realize that this will take too long despite his efforts. With that being said, the hero decided to prepare himself in order to go out. He then looked at the calendar, and just as he began to think of how he had to attend dinner with his fiancée's family, something caught his attention, something that he looked at in treatment. The real Decollane marked a day that is soon to arrive as death anniversary. Later on at the Von Meckel restaurant, Zeit thanked the professor for coming, stating that his sister should have arrived by now. The girl was then complimented by her brother on her attire. Julie sat there waiting in a delightful dress, which left Jiwoo amazed and in awe. This made him realize why his character had feelings for the knight after finally seeing how magnificent she was when she replaced the armor with a dress. Just then, something caught our hero's attention. A 4th presence was sitting with them at the table. The hero grew wary as he didn't notice the unexpected guest, seeing how all of his attention went to Julie. This mysterious person was no other than Josephine. The lady wasn't simply Julie's older sister attending this dinner, but also a named character that Decollane should always be highly wary of. Josephine was a sociopath, just as strong as her brother, who cared more about the ends than the means, and the leader of Shadow, a secret spy network. The lady cherished her sister to the point where she would get angered by anything that might harm her. This also made our hero wonder why Josephine hadn't made an attempt on his character's life yet, seeing how he could clearly see it upon entering the room, as the elder sister was displaying a murderous scarlet aura revealed by Villain's fate. This showed just how eminent a death variable regarding Josephine was, making him realize that he must showcase how much he cared about this union. Zeit immediately asked the professor to schedule their wedding day, seeing how they had been engaged for 3 years. Julie tried to speak her mind only to be quickly silenced by her elder brother. Decollane was about to unveil his decision, which Zeit was eager to hear. Our hero then looked at the sociopath sitting at the table. Jiwoo declared that he will give the choice to his fiancée, and even cancel their union if she wishes so, leaving her utterly frustrated. This left the head of the household intrigued, seeing how casually the man was speaking of breaking up with his little sister. Zeit assumed that this was because the both of them had been cold to each other before, urging him to fix his relationship, seeing how complex the matter was, and stating that the family's elders will surely disapprove of the dissolvement of the engagement. With that being said, the knight decided to speak up and addressed her older brother, demanding a private conversation with her promised one. Zeit turned to the concerned man, who nodded in agreement. Just like that, Josephine and Zeit left the younger sister alone with her promised one. With that, the both of them were now face to face. Julie immediately demanded to know what the professor was plotting, as a vile anger filled her eyes. Meanwhile, outside the room, Josephine was secretly spying on their conversation, and so Julie demanded an explanation. The protagonist was placed in a tough spot as he was aware that they were being spied on by none other than Josephine from the other side of the door. Our hero was certain that she used her extravagant act to place a wiretap in the room, as it wasn't in her nature to do anything simple. Yet this could turn out to be an advantage to our hero, seeing how he was well aware of her trickery. The protagonist wanted to take this opportunity in order to make her believe that he truly loves her little sister. And so he began to speak, stating that he didn't lie, as Josephine listened closely, yet Julie couldn't quite understand it. So the professor explained how he couldn't just break up with her like he wants, seeing how far they were into it, yet the knight was more interested in knowing what despicable schemes he will inflict upon her, seeing how he had used his connections in order to force their engagement, as well as promising her family compensations, and as our hero tried to speak, she angrily recalled how he affirmed to her that she was putting her life on the line by fighting, and screamed at him for destroying her dream of joining the Imperial Knights and spreading nasty rumors about her after she refused to join an order under his family. With that being said, she asked once again about the new evil scheme that he was plotting. Jiwoo stood silent, as he was aware of it all, and this is his character who confused obsession with love, did the unforgivable in order to isolate his fiancée and keep her by his side, which is why he couldn't hold any grudge against the lady for despising him so much. So the man affirmed that he will stop the evil schemes, yet she assumed that this was just one of his old tricks. To the knight's shock, the mage admitted that he was an obstacle in her way, and that all his past deeds were evil, leaving her with an uncomfortable silence. The protagonist explained how her siblings as well couldn't go back to the way it was, and when she tried to argue about it, he explained that if it weren't the case, they wouldn't have opposed the dissolvement of their engagement, leaving the listening Josephine quite intrigued. The head professor then added how he was aware that in order to achieve her goal of becoming a defender, she must leave her family, which left her quite shocked. Decolan explained how he was a disloyal liar, yet the lady couldn't quite understand him, and as he kept on babbling in order to explain, she asked him to cut straight to the chase. Decolan proposed to keep on their engagement but never fulfill it, seeing how politics forbid him from releasing his fiancée, allowing her to freely use him as a shield until the opportunity comes for her to realize her lifelong dream. Yet she couldn't help but feel that this was another one of his evil schemes. The hero affirmed that he didn't want anything in return, but if he were to choose a reward, it would be to see her happy at least once a month. The protagonist affirmed that this was his only wish. Upon hearing this, Julie found herself shocked with a face covered in red. Josephine herself was baffled by what she had just heard, leaving her older brother intrigued. The protagonist simply uttered the words he needed to speak in order to avoid death, yet then again, seeing how adorable the embarrassed knight was over his declaration, forced him to admit that he had grown to share the feelings that his character harbored for his fiancée. With that being said, Julie tried to regain her composure, stating that she won't believe him, and upon seeing him laugh, burst out in annoyance. With that, the spying older sister assumed that the professor truly loved her little sister, which is why she decided to prolong her observation period. Just like that, our hero earned himself 2 store currencies by dodging death once again. The sunset of the death anniversary had arrived. Our protagonist, sitting in the car, began to think of how fast time flies as came the day of an important event. Our hero had set foot in the cemetery. Jiwoo began to think of how graveyards invoked all kinds of emotions in everyone's hearts, and how the last lights of the day pervaded the greenery of the graveyards and the fractured tombstones. The hero found himself moved by this cemetery even before arriving, seeing how it contained his own memories that didn't belong to the character, but to him, the game developer. Back then, at a random night at work, someone decided to place an Easter egg. The team leader decided to give the intermediate boss a bit of background after getting permission from the higher-ups, yet Jiwoo was opposed to the idea, seeing how they were already working overtime, and that this idea wouldn't affect the sales, yet the lady affirmed that this action would have its own importance. Annoyed Yu-Ara affirmed that they must do their best while creating the game. In the end, Jiwoo, who couldn't understand her point of view, decided to let her be, seeing how his opinion was meaningless. The team leader affirmed that this was a great idea that will surely be useful, explaining how Deculine had a dead past fiancé, making our hero recall how happy she was to express her original ideas, which she couldn't quite understand. With that being said, the lady began to tease him about caring for the team, seeing how he was generously bringing them drinks. Back to the present, the protagonist wondered about the nature of the Easter egg that the team leader, that wanted it so much, placed in the game. The protagonist had discovered such things as a way to keep his true memories. Yet upon looking at it, he began to wonder if he should laugh or cry about it, as on the tombstone was marked Yu-Ara von Feiergeist Mahinicht, followed by a small note of thankfulness. Jiwoo couldn't understand why his ex had written her name on a tombstone. This left him utterly confused, as while this character was created in his image, the game leader gave his dead fiancée her own name. But the most confusing part was Yu-Ara expressing her gratitude towards him, and so he began to kneel down on the grave. Jiwoo then found himself crying over a single word of thankfulness. This made him feel as if his ex-girlfriend was right beside him, making his past memories come back all at once. Jiwoo clearly remembered how she cheerfully praised his work, or covered for him when he was called, and how she was his source of energy, and held his hand when she confessed her feelings to him. The protagonist remembered well the 7 years they had spent together. Tears began to roll down his eyes as he recalled everything they had been through together, but at the same time, someone was watching him. Someone with a spiteful hate towards magicians. Shortly after, our hero used his character's cold personality in order to calm himself down, when suddenly he was left intrigued upon stumbling upon someone. This person was in fact an acquaintance. Just like that, the mage was now face to face with the wizard killer. Lockhart ragefully expressed how surprised he was to see that the magician knew of him. The protagonist grew wary as he was now in front of Lockhart, the magician slayer, a mini-boss exclusive to mages who became a threat to all magicians due to his attribute, magic magnification. With that being said, the serial killer charged at our alarmed hero. The head professor, who unleashed a powerful spell, began to think of how broken magic immunity was. The wizard killer's attribute didn't also possess any clear weaknesses, seeing how spells couldn't physically reach him, meaning that magic was useless in the serial killer's domain. Lockhart then began to laugh like a madman, affirming to the hero that the use of magic was pointless against him as he charged ahead. Our hero took a step back in order to avoid the slash at the last second and kept on evading the man's dagger over and over again. Jiwoo then began to think of how a regular magician would have lost hope in front of such a foe, yet for him, this wasn't the case. As the serial killer charged at him once again, the protagonist punched him in the face, easily knocking him into the ground. Deculane affirmed that magic nullification wasn't a problem for him, and just as the mage killer was about to start insulting our hero, he was quickly defeated. A few days ago, our hero had acquired the necessary money in order to buy improvement in mana quality from the shop. This greatly increased the power of his mana and forced him to readjust, seeing how a simple jab slammed the chair into the ceiling. Due to this newly purchased skill, the protagonist found himself using more power for a smaller cost regarding his mana reserves, but quickly realized that this new purchase also affected some other aspects as he decided to work out. Just as he grabbed the bar, he was left utterly shocked. Upon seeing that he had crushed the pull-up bar within his hand, the hero realized that the improvement of his mana quality had upgraded the rest of his stats. Back to the present, the hero used his inhuman strength in order to defeat Lockhart the killer, earning him stat currencies by vanquishing death once again, making him realize that his newest purchase affected the rest of his stats. Deculane also realized that his current iron mana could have granted him victory, yet he had an easier win seeing how his attribute had been improved. Lockhart then began to talk about how driving mages to extinction should have been in his power, before treating them all as heathens who are powerless without magic and insulting grand facilities like the Magic Tower, Viosum, and Bercht. The hero began to think about the killer's immunity to magic and his deep hate towards wizards, as well as his obsession over the topic, making him realize that the man was actually a member of the Red Film race. Upon hearing this, the wizard killer was left utterly shocked, seeing how the professor was aware of his race. The Bloodshroud race was distinguished by the red tissue it has at birth and the rumors around it of having demonic origins, and so its members, who were the natural enemies of mages, had no choice but to hide themselves, seeing how magic was created in order to fight off the devils. The conflict between magicians and the Red Film race was something very important that forged trivial points within the plot of the game. And now our hero was standing in front of one of its members, thinking of how they struggled every day due to their ancestors, seeing how some of their members could be getting slain at that moment. Our hero then explained that he understood the rage of his opponent, seeing how much oppression he must have gone through before explaining that he would become just like his oppressors if he let out his frustration on an innocent magician. Yet Lockhart was having none of it, as he demanded to be ended quickly. But to his shock, the man affirmed that his race didn't harm anyone. Hearing those words from the mouth of a magician greatly angered the mage slayer. The protagonist introduced himself as a member of House Eucline, a family of aristocrats that had maintained its honor, making the defeated one even angrier, assuming that his opponent was just being pretentious. But then our hero interrupted him, explaining how he only lost his honor while fighting a demon. To Lockhart's shock, the professor explained how it was in the nature of his bloodline, who had always been demon hunters, always felt enraged upon encountering a demon and seeing how he didn't go fully berserk against the man and didn't respond to his provocation nor lost control of himself. The only possible deduction was that Lockhart and the rest of his race weren't from the devil, leaving the man amazed, as for the first time he had seen through aristocrat dignity, when suddenly two rushing men interrupted their conversation. Upon seeing this, our hero quickly kicked the member of the Red Film race in the head, before asking him to not react and let himself get captured. The policeman presented himself as Inspector Ropa and immediately began to praise Deculane for kicking the murderer in the face and asking if he wanted him to be punished more. But our hero quickly refused. With that being said, to the policeman's shock, the protagonist began to exhaust his magic, turning a big structure into a thin rope. He explained that steel wire is better than magical handcuffs against the magic nullifier, Lockhart, making them realize why the magic radar couldn't detect him. Inspector Ropa was then left intrigued, as the man who assumed him to be on patrol called him out for immediately arriving. So he explained, as a lady listened from a hiding spot, how they received an anonymous complaint, making him assume that they were seen by someone. With that being said, our hero decided to resume his way, glad to have resolved the matter without bloodshed. Jiwoo didn't want the places where his memories are engraved to see his hands tainted in blood. And the day after this incident, the summoning to Berkt was being discussed in the training home of Deculane's residence. Our hero was intrigued to see his half-sister personally moving to give him the parchment, making her affirm that she had no other choice, seeing how it was the duty of the current head of the family to attend such matters. According to the parchment, the mages were summoned to a meeting due to the demon appearing in the Mountain of Darkness. Just like that, the main quest known as Berkt's Call had started. The parchment also mentioned that one should bring his own bodyguard to the meeting that will be held in 7 days from now. The girl proposed to bring their driver Jeff, who used to be a mercenary, but the protagonist quickly denied, seeing how the man was now more comfortable with the car than the sword. The young one affirmed that a bodyguard was necessary, seeing how journeying to Berkt was a rather perilous trip. Yet when he asked his half-sister if she cared about him, she was left startled and burst out at him that she only needed him until he makes her family head. With that being said, the little lady tried to re-establish her composure and return to the main subject, asking him to leave the matter of the bodyguard in her hands, seeing how she had a trustworthy source in mind. Meanwhile, at the post of the Order of Freyheim, the recruits were passionately training. Julie praised them for their attitude before asking them to not get distracted. At the same time, a man was watching from afar, unable to come up with a decision as someone arrived from behind him. After seeing that it was a dark, gloomy man, the knight was left startled as he asked Veron to showcase his presence a little more. The vice captain explained to Veron how a big job had just come in and how hard it was to confront the captain with it. Seeing how the mission was to shield Deculane, to the young one's shock, Veron grew frustrated as the man explained how the job required protecting the train, seeing how they would refuse anything directly related to the man, but he stated that they shouldn't refuse it, seeing how such an enormous job would bring their private knight order fame as well as grant them a lucrative sum. And as the vice captain tried to bring up the couple, the man didn't have any of it, explaining how the leader Julie wasn't someone to mix her personal problems with professional life. With that being said, the old man agreed to share the job with the light captain. While a dark, murderous look formed itself in Veron's eyes, Berkt was in the north of the continent, located at a high altitude, and is a home for a group of mages known as the Elder. All magical schools across the continent had to first pass their ideas by this region, even the Magic Tower, as Berkt's decisions were unquestionable. This place, which had great power over the magical world, was considered to be its base, and seeing how rarely summoning assemblies occur, attending the summon was a high honor to the mages, as they would be considered great names among the others. But this summon was also known as the Tombstone of the Magicians. At the train station leading to Berkt, the knight captain asked the vice captain if she had made the necessary preparations, which she confirmed. Just then, he arrived. The head professor and his amazed assistant made their entrance. Just then, someone began to speak to our hero, as this person, that he recognized as his fiancée, explained how her order of knights would be responsible for their safety in the first half of the train until they arrive. The protagonist couldn't help but find it odd, seeing how she was stuttering with that face. Julie couldn't help but recall their last meeting and how he demanded to see her smile. The lady was left unsure if she should smile or not, or even what kind of smile to display. At the same time, her subordinate mistook the situation by assuming that she was trying to repress her hate for professional reasons. And just as the man was about to propose himself, a knight introduced himself as Veron, explaining how he would be the one responsible for their safety and how the captain and the knight were only here to show their respect. His colleague took the opportunity to reassure the professor by stating that the skills of Veron were acknowledged by their entire order. Upon hearing this, the hero decided to be wary and use his sharp eyesight on Veron. Yet upon sensing no hostility from him, he assumed himself to have grown paranoid. Veron explained how every mage had an escort and a proper cabin, and that he would be the one to guard the one assigned to our hero. With that being said, the knight captain wished the professor a safe trip, and as she made her leave, she turned to him and gave him an awkward, forced smile. Yet while this intrigued her subordinates, the protagonist couldn't help but feel happy, seeing how she had kept her word. Later on, inside the train, our hero and his assistant found themselves patiently waiting to arrive. Deculane suggested that Veron go and take some rest, seeing how they had many traveling hours ahead of them, which the knight agreed with, as the train rolled on track, and his assistant was deeply sleeping. Our hero began to think of the summon's other name and how Berkt which was the center of the magic world, had another face. Seeing how, on the way to each summon, many sudden events usually occurred, like the event known as Strain Attack, which was one of the many death doors to our hero's character that consisted of safely arriving to Berkt by choosing the safest train. For one, to ensure his security, he could use the dark market in order to gather intel regarding targeted trains. Jiwoo began to think that the one modeled after him would have shortly resorted to a solution, yet this wasn't an option to him. Seeing how he had already written himself off from any criminal connection, our hero prepared himself by acquiring the fighting style of the great fighter Estran, using his skills while thinking of how excited his assistant was when invited back then when he suggested that Alan come to Berkt as his assistant and gave him the freedom to decline. The young man began to cry, thankful for this opportunity, while the germaphobe protagonist stated that he would retract his invitation if he made a mess. Jiwoo couldn't help but feel surprised by the young man's unexpected ambitious nature for agreeing to tag along despite the awaiting dangers. Just then, the wheels of the train were stopped. Our heroes had now arrived at a station, and yet, Dekalean sat there waiting with his assistant and his bodyguard. Seeing how close they now were to reaching their destination safely, the man assumed that he had picked the safest train, which meant that he had increased the defensive abilities of his world-renowned stylist-made outfit, using Midas Touch for nothing. Yet this wasn't his only preparation, as he had also prepared steel shurikens by using Midas Torch before placing them throughout the train. Our protagonist had even reinforced the defensive capabilities of his assistant's clothes in case of emergency, and after thinking carefully, he realized that he had almost exhausted his magic reserves by abusing his skill, making him think that he should have gone for an alternative, but he quickly ditched his regret, as one should always expect the worst and pray for the best. With that being said, our relieved hero wished to safely arrive at his destination. Yet while on his way there, the train caught fire and suddenly exploded. A few days before our hero's departure, the father asked his daughter on the train if the Imperial University was giving her too many assignments. Sylvia confirmed before explaining that she had missed some lectures, making her father praise her for working so hard despite one day becoming an archmage. Yet to his shock, the lady affirmed that in order to achieve this dream, she must work hard. Lady Illid wanted to attend the protagonist's lessons more than worry about her rival. The curious young one then asked her father about their early departure for the summit. After pausing for a second, he explained how this trip is sometimes named the Graveyard of Mages, and while she assumed that it was just fables, the man affirmed that the tales were true. According to the head of Elade, some mages were doomed to die on this trip, like the 11 magicians from 15 years ago, and how being invited to this summit had always been considered a great honor and a symbol of power among the 12 noble families. Summoned mages, who didn't attend the event, had their family expelled, giving hope to others to gain their seats. This made Sylvia fear the worst, as she realized that there was an easy way to make a great family fall. The trip to the summit was a way for small wizard families to slay the big ones and take their place. The girl found herself overwhelmed by this sudden cruelty, as her father explained how he had dragged her along early to avoid harm, seeing how he received intel of a soon-to-be train attack, before beginning to think how he had to share it with his daughter, seeing how they were in the same boat, how she had guessed that they couldn't inform everyone. The man then explained that the 3 now and the 12 traditional families were always changing, and that the whole wizard world was to blame, seeing how if one met his end on his trip to the assembly, it would be considered a natural death. Back to the present, where our hero was heading to Berkt and planted on the train, and then they suddenly went off. Both professor and bodyguard could feel the change. This left our hero quite alerted, and so a bright blue light came out of the window, waking up his assistant. Alan was left baffled as the entire train was levitating. This placed our hero at ease, as having memorized elementary telekinesis allowed him to save the train from going off track. Meanwhile, on top of the train, the assassins were talking about how impressive it was for the professor to levitate the entirety of the vehicle, yet one of them asked the others to not be distracted from the task ahead, seeing how a generous reward awaited them, and so a cable reached the hole within the cabin, and so they began to move. Just like that, our hero and his assistant found themselves the target of mercenaries, yet the protagonist could only see them as fools as he began to resort to his head and shurikens in order to slay the intruders, stating that their actions had been all calculated. Upon seeing this, the hostile man was left amazed, and as Alan began to panic, the head professor decided to knock him unconscious, but upon doing so, was left quite intrigued. With that being said, he tasked his bodyguard to evacuate the assistant as well as the other passengers. The knight quickly obeyed, leaving the protagonist alone with the assassins. Jiwoo was left with doubts upon knocking out his assistant, seeing how oddly the senses of his attribute Iron Man had reacted, yet decided to focus on the matter at hand, explain to the mercenaries how they must be aware of what will happen. stating that no one will be to blame for their deaths as they began to share. After successfully evacuating everyone, Verone began to think in silence. Meanwhile, inside the levitating train, with all the assassins having met their ends, our hero was left exhausted, as slaying the assassins while levitating the entire train took a toll on his mana reserves. Just then, he noticed his bodyguard entering the cabin and informing him that everyone had been successfully evacuated, and just as he began to praise him, couldn't help but feel something odd as the look inside the eyes of the knight wasn't the same as before. Yet just as he assumed that he was just surprised by the ambush, a burning scarlet aura suddenly emerged. The attribute variant Faith had reacted to Veron's murderous aura. This made our hero realize that he was being careless, seeing how the man had suppressed his murderous intent. The knight affirmed that seeing the man alive left him glad as he unsheathed his sword, claiming that he will be the one to put an end to his life. After affirming that everyone had been brought to safety, the knight claimed that he will now murder the one that he was supposed to protect. Jiwoo assumed that his bodyguard was being paid to betray him and was quickly silenced in a burst of anger upon bringing up his fiancée as the potential culprit. Veron affirmed that the man wasn't worthy of speaking his master's name, as she was an honorable knight that would never resort to such methods. Yet the knight affirmed that he shall kill her fiancé for her sake, making our hero realize that Julie had nothing to do with this matter. Just like that, he was now in front of someone acknowledged by the entire order with little mana left, leaving all odds to arrive in time against him. With that being said, Veron launched himself in order to end the one he was meant to protect. Our hero, who blocked the strike, realized that he had only one solution left. Just then, to the knight's intrigue, the entire terrain began to shake. The hero decided to drop the train by shaking off his telekinesis. Just like that, the entire vehicle began to fall into the abyss with the both of them inside. Meanwhile, Sylvia refused the ice cream that Sirio had brought her, seeing how she was already full. She then asked the guard knight of her family if all the guests had arrived, so he explained how Rewind and the head professor were the only ones absent before asking the lady if she was expecting someone, yet she denied. Upon seeing this, Sirio decided to leave her alone but stay close in case she needed anything. The girl began to think about her teacher. It was a scenery that the girl didn't mean to witness, as when she went to present flowers to her mother that had passed away. It all happened on that day that had begun just like any other. The girl took this opportunity to complain about our protagonist, assigning them a lot of homework to her mother, only to be attracted by a mysterious noise. Upon peeking from behind a tree, Sylvia was left amazed, as this was none other than her teacher. The elegance that he showcased even in this sad state affirmed that it was no other than Deculane himself. His presence in the graveyard intrigued the girl, seeing how she didn't expect him to be someone who mourns the dead. But then the man got up, and the state that he was in left the girl more shocked than ever as tears were rolling down his eyes. The cold and calculated professor was crying. This captivated Sylvia, as the one that she saw as an annoying, prideful teacher had also experienced the pain of losing a cherished someone, to the point where she was unable to keep his tears out of her mind. After thinking deeply and recalling her father's intelligence regarding a future train attack, Sylvia found herself annoyed, as there was something she wanted to put to the test after the main character's lecture, which might be achievable by using the Mana Stone as a catalyst. Magic had 3 attributes, and the one called Origin depended on the caster, and with the girl possessing the 3 primary colors of magic, she decided to use the Mana Stone as a catalyst in order to synthesize a new shape. Just like that, the primary color's creation had been a success. After naming the magical bird Swift and linking its eyes to hers, she decided to set him away and show her the world from his point high in the sky. Meanwhile, back at the train, our exhausted hero had barely survived the fall. To his fortune, the train had stopped mid-fall. His attribute, Iron Man, should allow him to quickly heal his broken bones. When suddenly the Red Murderer's aura came back, Veron charged at him once again. Seeing how well the knight was, left the professor utterly shocked, and so he decided to resort to his metal shards in order to attack the knight. Yet upon seeing the projectile bounce off of him, he realized that the knight was using his ki to protect himself. After pointing out the determination of the professor to keep on living, Veron kept on charging with his sword at his master's fiancée. The confrontation was fierce, but our hero couldn't help but feel that the knight had the upper hand. This made the protagonist realize that even if he was in his perfect shape, he still wouldn't be able to rival the one attacking him. Yet he wasn't about to give up just yet, as he resorted to the rare attribute known as Resolute, that allows one to gain determination and ferocity in battle that couldn't be broken with magic. The protagonist was well aware that his character would never give up in such a situation before blocking a powerful sword strike with his chargers. As the confrontation went on, the hero found himself stuck. He was now in a perilous situation as his enemy's blade was now a few inches away from his neck. At that moment, the protagonist wondered if his death would result in his return to the real world. Just then, blood was splashed inside the train. And at this precise instant, the magical bird Swift arrived at the scene, just as the blade was about to strike our hero. At the precise moment he had lost all hope, he was suddenly left alerted. As the space around him was being bent, Veron looked intrigued as blood appeared on his hand. Suddenly, blood splattered everywhere as the knight suddenly found himself dismembered. Upon seeing how his enemy was now in pain, the hero decided to take this unknown and sudden opportunity in order to slash Veron's talon. This made the man trip and fall towards the train's edge, but just before he could fall to his death, the man pulled out a dagger and stabbed the train in order to hold on to it. But despite this maneuver, the man found himself slowly slipping when he was suddenly approached by the one he had just tried to kill. Now at the professor's mercy, he demanded to know what Deculane had used in order to reverse the situation. Deculane affirmed that he was also clueless before asking the man for the reason he tried to take his life, seeing how they didn't share any history whatsoever. So Veron brought up all the atrocities that the man had committed towards his master. This intrigued the professor, seeing how the knight tried to kill him for his captain's sake, despite her not demanding it, and so he asked about the nature of his relationship with his fiancée. Veron affirmed that the man could never fathom it. Back then, as the citizens thanked Julie, who humbly accepted their gratefulness, stating that she was only doing her job, the police had arrested a young Veron, who affirmed that he was innocent and that he wasn't the one who started the fight. Yet the lady affirmed that her son would never do such a thing. The knight watched as the young man desperately tried to free himself. The mother then decided to hand the young thug to the police in order to see him beg for her mercy, claiming that she was going to charge him with trespassing and assault, which intrigued the knight, as it meant that the young man had illegally entered the lady's property, the rich woman affirmed, stating that such an act was befitting of his class. This left Julie intrigued, seeing how the skinny boy managed to climb the high walls, and so she proposed to hand the young one to the police herself, which the lady quickly agreed to. As they went on their way, Veron demanded to be freed, stating that he didn't commit any crime worthy of escorting him to the police station, but was quickly left intrigued upon seeing how Julie stopped. The knight brought up the well-known ill behavior of the Frisia family, making the young boy partially right, but as he screamed at her in arrogance, she angrily entered after them, leaving him silent as she affirmed that he shouldn't harm others. With that being said, she released him from his restraints, before proposing to help him get his wrath under control. Just like that, a hopeful look appeared in the skinny one's eyes. This day marked the first interaction between Julia and Veron, shortly after the young man joined the Knight Order. Yet due to his background and aggressive personality, he found himself an outsider among the others. Only one person paid attention to him. Julie came in to check on the new recruit, who affirmed that he didn't need anything, which she believed would always be true as long as he was with Julie. The knight was always on the front line, offering help to those in need. She was a pure soul who wouldn't be corrupt, and so he couldn't help but feel respect towards her, as well as romantic feelings. Back to the present, the man on the brink of death explained how he was well aware of his feelings being a nuisance to his liege, yet the young man was determined to kill the professor, seeing how certain he was that he would one day harm Julie. Our hero couldn't blame him for thinking of him as such, seeing how his character was the root of all evil within the game, before affirming that Veron wasn't right, seeing how he would reverse every evil deed that his game counterpart had ever done, as he was more determined than ever to ensure a future where Deculane survives, which is why he reached out his hand to the one that tried to kill him, as he affirmed that he would never try to hurt his fiancée. Jiwoo asked the young man to have faith in him, but just as our hero was about to catch the knight, a murderous scarlet aura was suddenly displayed, filling our hero with frustration. Seeing how Veron was still determined to kill him, the young man stated that he won't trust Deculane and would do everything he can in order to end his life. As he picked up one of his charges, the hero called out the young one for his stupidity, stating that his choice would forever be a pain in Julie's heart. Just like that, our hero went for the finishing blow. At that moment, the knight captain felt startled. The vice captain checked on her, but she quickly shook it off, assured her by stating that Veron was more than capable of handling any threat. At the same time, the competent knight fell to his death while wishing his master happiness. Meanwhile, Swift flew over the wrecked train. The entire scene had been carefully observed by Sylvia, who assumed that her teacher had killed his bodyguard who fell off the cliff. Yet she decided to correct herself, stating that the professor only did it in self-defense. Just then, the guard knight arrived to get the young lady as the assembly was soon to begin. With that, she headed inside, concerned whether her teacher would arrive on time or not. Shortly after, Vice Chief Lilia Freemine of the Security Bureau arrived at the scene. She began to question the train conductors regarding the attack, who stated that it wasn't something uncommon, seeing how they were near the Mage Summit, and when asked about casualties, it was revealed that no one was harmed. Yet 2 men went missing, which were the professor and his bodyguard, which shocked Lilia. The train conductors then pointed to a survivor, stating that he would explain the situation clearly, presenting him as someone overwhelmed by the incident to the point where he lost consciousness later on. Other survivors explained how they were saved by a knight and how the train was floating all along while the assassins tried to attack once again. They then presented the vice chief of the Security Bureau with an unexpected picture of the event. This left Lilia intrigued, wondering if the professor really made the entire train levitate on his own. But just as she was about to ditch the idea, she was mysteriously informed that the knight died after suddenly attacking the professor who had survived, leaving her authorities shocked as this intel was passed on to her by telepathy. She then looked at the crowd, thinking who the culprit may be, when suddenly one of the survivors pointed out a shady figure approaching them, which was no other than our hero who had survived the ambush. The protagonist began to think of the mysterious phenomenon that allowed him to escape from the nameless knight's grasp, and that if this mysterious individual hadn't reacted, he would have been dead by now. This made the professor curse his own weakness, as he desperately wondered about the identity of his mysterious savior. The vice chief of the Security Bureau approached Deculin, stating that she wanted to interrogate him, yet the man ignored her before asking about the time, to which she revealed that it was 3:30, making him realize that he had 6 hours before the start of the summit. As Lilia tried to go with the normal procedure, he interrupted her once again, asking if there weren't any other trains going towards the summit. So she angrily explained how 2 other roads leading there also existed, and just as she was about to begin her interrogation, she realized that the professor had suddenly disappeared. She then turned to the train conductors, who assumed that he must have cast a spell on himself to increase his own speed. This made the officer assume that the man had a great amount of mana, seeing how he was using the high-level spell, accelerate right after the recent incident, making her realize that this was the protagonist that the wizard killer talked about. After that, at the Berked assembly, the wizards began to whisper among themselves. Sir Illide pointed out how the meeting was soon to start, while his daughter was concerned about the empty seat. Just then, an anonymous presence expressed how thankful it was towards those who had responded to his summon before the meeting started, and then displayed a terrifying amount of mana, making Sylvia recognize the presence as Dezekton, the mightiest of the elders who came close to the title of Archmage, who became a hermit by his own will, making her realize that she will need to match his level in order to achieve her lifelong dream. With that, the representatives of Elad, Bran, Rewind, and Viarad affirmed their presence. Then came the turn of our hero. The elder then pointed out how the man was still absent, and declared that Deculin would be banned from the 12 sorcerers if he didn't arrive before his name had been called 3 times. Sylvia then heard some of the mages gossip about how the protagonist's family had been in the 12 wizards for 2 centuries. They even began to mock the protagonist, stating that the downfall of his family wasn't a surprise with him being in charge, as he lacked the talent of an elite mage. This made the young lady wonder about the past evil deeds of her professor for the others to badmouth him as such, leaving her quite irritated. Deculin was called once, Deculin was called twice, as the nobles were eager to witness his downfall, yet just as his name was being called one last time, the door suddenly opened. Sylvia turned to see who had arrived, and everyone was left shocked. As Sir Eucline had made his entrance, he then got the snow off his attire, before fixing his hair and affirming in front of everyone who were left silent that he had arrived. The slow meeting quickly began to progress as the first subject at hand was the demon that appeared in the Mountain of Darkness. Bran stated that the appearance of such creatures near schools was more dangerous than the capital and stated that they should take the necessary measures. The matter was easily closed as Ethansel, who was an icon of holiness, expressed their opinion that no one opposed, quickly concluding the first subject. With that, the meeting came to a short break. Our hero was left drained after using all of his stamina and mana in order to rush to the summit, and was annoyingly amazed by how his character's attributes allowed him to arrive with a clean appearance. During the break, the hero was approached by none other than his assistant, who was worried about him. Alan apologized for not arriving sooner, stating that he was forbidden from entering after the meeting had started, yet the protagonist decided to drop the matter. Due to the recent incident, the protagonist grew intrigued by the real identity of his assistant. Seeing how odd he felt back then, he then asked himself about the reason behind his actions. This made him recall something that he had heard in a movie in the real world before asking his assistant to stay close to him at all times. The quote stated that one should keep his enemies closer to him than his friends. Decolayan was determined to unveil the true identity of Alan. With that, the wizards were ready to resume their meeting. The second subject was the recent appearance of the Bloodshroud magician, making our hero realize that this delicate topic would take more time to close than the first one. An angry hand was then slammed onto the table. Bethany, the head of the Viarad family, affirmed that the members of this race were parasites who were secretly breeding and multiplying, but the head of Bran opposed her, stating that they didn't have enough proof to separate the red film race from the others. The man claimed that they must come up with fake proof to use the magic tower for the sake of exterminating them, which didn't please the lady. The protagonist had already predicted that this topic would end up in an argument. Vethan then explained that the Bloodshroud race was secretly gathering itself, and that he knows for a fact that they have someone leading them. But as the lady affirmed that this was just his own theory, the man was left disturbed. So he stated that the very concept of them gathering in secret and leaving the 12 sorcerers in the dark should repulse her as well, before firmly stating that numerous magicians lost their lives 60 years ago due to their inability to come up with a decision, leaving the head of Bran silenced. With that being said, Sir Illide decided to ask the man for his opinion regarding the matter, seeing how his family had always been demon hunters from ancient times. The hero who lived in the present was well aware of the result of the hatred of the defeated as it led to unnecessary disasters. Yet our hero decided to stand up for the Bloodshroud race as a way to delay the inevitable until the future main quest arrives, seeing how this race shouldn't be fathomed as everyone's enemy. And so the professor explained how the Bloodshroud was once a threat. Yet reviewing the old manuscripts will reveal that everything started from a miscommunication, which intrigued the red-haired man. And so the protagonist explained how long ago a lady named Rodran was falsely accused of witchcraft, which led to the suppression and death of numerous Bloodshrouds, allowing the cycle of death and misery to start. Our hero then pointed out that the incident that happened 60 years ago was due to political reasons, as a man of stone mind in their lands left some angered Vethan explained how their stress must have been born from the devil, that our hero's family of demon hunters should know better. Decalin explained that his house had always hunted demons rather than Bloodshrouds, making the man affirm that there weren't any differences with that, and an uncomfortable atmosphere had settled in. To the young man's surprise, his master asked the fat one if he was ready to assume the weight of his own words, affirming that the one who treats humans as monsters is bound to become a villain. With that, the meeting and the topic of the Bloodshroud race were postponed until the next day. Sir Elad was talking to Sylvia about how he wouldn't see her until the next meeting, seeing how the rules stipulated that each mage shall remain in his room. Yet the daughter affirmed to her father that this wasn't a problem, seeing how many children her age slept in separate rooms from their parents. He then explained how she should be wary, seeing how numerous events occur at night due to the high mana of certain mages, and asked her to read the hotel regulations. After reading the paper, the girl decided to go to sleep, assuming that this set of rules must have been made in order to scare children. Later that same night, the girl woke up in order to go fetch some water. Yet just as she finished her drink, something odd began to happen. Weird magic began to affect her surroundings, leaving her startled. Seeing how her room had morphed into a hallway made her assume that she must have not followed one of the rules, when suddenly something left her utterly baffled. It turned out that the instruction manual advised people to stay asleep until morning, and seeing how these phenomena were uncommon in her previous room within this hotel, she quickly deduced that it wasn't the case here due to how close she was to the dense mana of the elders. With that, Sylvia tried to calm herself after admitting that leaving her room was an act of foolishness. Just then, an anonymous presence echoed through the hall. After realizing that she wasn't alone in the dark, she rushed to find somewhere to hide. The Rosary Hotel only had one floor, which is why one should avoid appearing stairs at any price. One should also avoid entering or peeking through open doors within the establishment. The little lady decided to maintain her composure, as there was still a little hope left for her. But another rule of the hotel was to not answer the door when knocked, and so as the entity began to draw closer, she banged for help, when suddenly the door she was banging on opened, only to reveal her professor. The little one felt relieved after being invited into the man's room. Sylvia apologized, explaining how she ended up outside her room right after getting out of bed. This made the protagonist scold her for ignoring the rules, seeing how such phenomena were common in this place that was filled with spirits lost to magic. Sylvia began to wonder if the ever-unchanging professor was able to rescue her because he was different from the others. When suddenly an anonymous sound came to her attention, ectoplasm made its way into the room, allowing an evil spirit to enter. The teacher asked his student to not move, as his shots were launched quickly, cutting down the spirit and ultimately defeating it. The young girl watched, amazed upon seeing the ghosts getting slain. The hero explained how it was a simple magic meant to end lives, before stating that magic wasn't created for such purposes in the first place. For some reason, hearing this moved the girl's heart, and so she decided to showcase a spell, asking if it was Flowing Flame, which the man confirmed, followed by 3 spells that she showcased and perfectly executed according to her professor. Yet Sylvia grew annoyed as the man didn't gratify her with a proper gaze. She decided to demonstrate to him a somewhat failed spell in order to get his attention, so he praised her for her work, before stating to her surprise that the magic circle she was using was somewhat flawed, and so she asked the professor about how she could improve it. But the protagonist affirmed that this was something for her to discover, which angered the young one, seeing how he had helped her rival before. Yet when the teacher affirmed that the other student helped herself, the little girl grew frustrated. Dekulayan asked her to have patience, as her unyielding determination would surely result in improving her growth, and that she could reach her dream slowly but steadily, affirming that she was one of the 3 mages with the right potential to achieve it. This made her remember all the compliments that she had received, and how she was called a prodigy. Sylvia grew up hearing the same empty praises again and again. However, her teacher's words for some reason felt sincere. Later that night, as the girl rested while the professor studied, something came to his attention, as a golden energy was coming from the window. With that being said, the protagonist decided to head outside. Seeing how he was in Berkt and how his wealthy magnet had been activated, he assumed that he was on the brink of finding a rare item in the hard mountain roads, when suddenly, monsters began to appear from behind him. A giant specter rose in front of our hero, who remained unfazed. The astral entity didn't expect to be ignored, yet it didn't give up, as it tried again and again to strike fear into the protagonist's heart. Just then, the man stopped and asked the ghost if it knew about any powerful item nearby. With that, it began to run away, crying in an unknown language, leaving the protagonist utterly intrigued. But just then, he stumbled upon it. Our hero had obtained a purified fragment of the monetary that was struck by lightning, which was a great material exceeding his expectations. From the first day he had possessed the character's body, our hero tried to use average talent in order to grow stronger. But using this item in order to create a wand could potentially greatly boost his magical powers. Just like that, Jiwoo had obtained a treasure that exceeded all of his expectations. The next day, as the meeting was resumed, Vethan and Dekulayan found themselves in conflict once again, making the other sorcerers uncomfortable. To everyone's shock, the man who was supposed to lead the charge was defending the Bloodshroud race. Sir Elad also assumed that the head professor must be preparing for yet another sneaky plot. Sylvia assumed that everyone shared the same doubts as her father, yet she didn't have the same opinion about her teacher, who was just stating facts. With that, the elder decided to put an end to the conflict, stating that they would resume this matter in the next meeting, as it demanded to address the next subject. The summit then came to an end after a few days, seeing how all other matters had been quickly settled. The angry noble passed by our hero in a vulgar way. This left him quite annoyed, as despite his desire to give himself the best odds in the main quest, he seemed to have formed new enemies. A day after, in the shopping district of Berkt, as our hero was browsing the shop, he was determined to create a wand before returning home. Yet he wondered what material would pair best with his newest find, when suddenly the assistant seemed to have noticed something, and so he called the attention of the professor, before pointing out someone whom he claimed was the one who allowed him to reach his destination without being harmed. Upon seeing the person, our hero was left shocked, as it was none other than the vice chief of the security bureau, who also seemed surprised to see our hero. The protagonist decided to treat the lady to a meal in order to properly thank her for saving his assistant. The lady then explained how the investigation had come to an end, pointing out to the ringed man how his bodyguard was considered to be killed in the surprise attack. Just then, the food had arrived. The vice chief struggled to see what Lockhart saw in the protagonist a few days earlier in the Imperium Security Bureau. The mass murderer was to be sent to Lakordak for his notorious crimes, and when asked if he had anything to defend himself, Lockhart stood silent, making the officer call him out for having a sharp tongue except during interrogations. The man was then intrigued as the officer spoke the word power. She urged him to turn on his ability. The mass murderer cracked a smile, before doing as she said. The magical wave targeted observation cameras, before quickly taking them out. With that being done, Lilia Freeman slammed her fist on the table, expressing her anger towards Lockhart, leaving him amused as she scolded him for ignoring her orders by putting on an act that harmed their race. The officer stated that she was planning to end his life, seeing how if it comes to light that he is a Bloodshroud, she will also be affected by public opinion. She then explained to her fellow Bloodshrouds that they could take advantage of the Empire as long as they didn't expose their true hated race. So the murderer explained how people fear them due to their demon powers, but the officer explained that it was irrelevant, seeing how other races also had powers, She then called him out for attacking the professor, seeing how they were keeping tabs on his family. This left the magician slayer uneasy, as it suggested that they aimed to take the entire family's life. The officer explained how they were only spying on him and that they would terminate him if he turned out to be a threat, which the man urged her not to do. As according to him, Decilin was a true aristocrat that deserved to live, but hearing this made the lady assume that he had gone crazy due to the atrocities that he had committed. Yet in reality, Lockhart had been amazed by the sincerity of the man and his elegance as he affirmed that his race was also a part of humanity. Lockhart assumed that his race would be treated just like any others if they were more aristocrat-like our protagonist. To the officer's surprise, it was revealed that the mass murderer had been spared despite his real race being unveiled. So Lelia informed them how it was the House of Eucline that led the charge that massacred the race, and she wasn't aware of it, but quickly grew annoyed as the murderer stated that they wouldn't be better than their oppressors for judging today's generation based on ancient sins. Lockhart found it ironic before asking her about the time she had left in her position. Yet she wasn't worried as their race couldn't be easily distinguished. Then again, there was a food that they couldn't consume, which is why they should simply refuse to eat it. The officer then pointed out how the current emperor was ill and how they should wait in silence to see his successor's opinion about their race, and so she pledged the killer to keep a low profile until then. Back to the present, the lady couldn't see the man in front of her as a real aristocrat. But just then, someone else arrived, stinking with the smell of ale. The hero affirmed to this person that they didn't have anything to converse on, as it was no other than the head of the House Rewind. Yet Ilhelm affirmed that they did, and that it would come from the dark depths of our hero's true self. Meanwhile, at the Order of Knights under Julie, the captain was left blown away by what she had just heard as the vice-captain affirmed once again, to her utter misery, that Veron had died on duty, and so she asked the man to quickly prepare himself. The angry knight captain wanted a clear explanation from her fiancé on what happened to her knight. Back at the restaurant, the officer was left intrigued by the sudden presence of Ilhelm Rewind. The man began to talk of how stunned he was at his old peer's new opinion while still being wary of the other families, and so he demanded an explanation as to why he was defending the red film race. Hearing this left the officer utterly shocked. Ilhelm recalled how Decilin once spoke of exterminating them, stating that lowly races shouldn't have the right to remain alive, before pointing out his offensive paper towards the blood shrouds while still in the university. Yet the protagonist didn't bother to respond. Alan was particularly pissed off by the man's arrogance, as he implied that he had acquired one of them to do his bidding. The protagonist decided to calm down his assistant, stating that no harm was done, seeing how the man in front of them wasn't but a mere fool, ultimately annoying the head of the Rewind House. Yet he decided to maintain his composure before bringing up the research presentation that was drawing near, and that it would prove if the professor had as much bite as he has bark as he left. The officer was left plunged deeply in her thoughts, seeing how the man in front of her was keeping his guard up regarding everyone else, and yet decided to support her race. She had a hard time believing that this came from this infamous cold-hearted man. With that being said, she began to recall the Wizard Slayer, and she was now convinced that his words were true. A day after the meeting with the officer, the hero tasked one of the best craftsmen to create him a wand before returning home. Just like that, our hero had met the 4 conditions of the quest Rockaloc's wands, allowing him to finally complete it, earning him store currency and a wand. Due to the character previously visiting the famous Rockalock, our hero found himself accomplishing a quest that he wasn't even aware of its existence. On the way back home, our hero shared a carriage with Vethan. Yet no heated argument occurred despite the man showcasing well his hostility. With that being said, the head professor finally concluded his long journey. The train then reached a station allowing Alan to stretch himself, and just as he explained to his superior how they should soon enjoy the seasonal scenery, after another station he suddenly noticed that they were in the presence of the Order of Knights. Jiwoo was surprised to see the captain with a sad expression. Julie then expressed how happy she was to see him well after hearing about the surprise attack. The hero thanked her after realizing that she must have heard about her late subordinate. Despite not knowing what kind of rumor had reached them exactly, the knights didn't look happy to see that he was the sole survivor. She then pointed out how Veron was rumored to have fallen while helping our hero evacuate the civilians, before making up her mind to ask him a question regarding the last moments of her subordinate. He looked at his fiancée's eyes in silence. For a second, it felt as if they were alone in the world. The protagonist planned to unveil to her the entire truth. He wanted at least his fiancée to know that Veron died after betraying him, but he didn't have the strength to tell Julie now that he was face to face with her. This made him hesitant whether he should unveil the ugly truth to his promised one, as the girl's heart was strong, yet not indestructible. The professor assumed that the knight captain would blame Varen's sin on herself, and so he made up his mind and decided to lie, even if this would make him even more of a monster in her sorrowful eyes. Just then, those who had tickets for the 4th train, which was destined for the Empire, were urged to get on the train. With that being said, the hero stated that he couldn't explain it well, as he pointed to the knight captain, how her subordinate met his end filled with emotions, and so she expressed her gratitude before stating that they would go check on the body. With that being said, Julie and her knights exited the scene. The game developer then compared himself to the late Varan, seeing how he was also being overwhelmed by his character's emotions. But just then, he was brought back to reality by his assistant calling out the knights for their bad behavior, as despite being also harmed by the incident, they looked at them despicably when someone treated the men as simpletons who shouldn't be held in grudge. The professor was shocked to see his student in front of him. As he asked the girl to clarify what she had just said, she suddenly handed him a book as a present, leaving him intrigued. Before running off, the assistant turned to his superior, asking for an explanation, yet the protagonist affirmed that he was clueless as well. With that, Decalain pointed out how tired he was and how he only wished to return home, and so he urged his assistant to accelerate as they rode the train back to the Empire. Back on the train, the protagonist teamed up with Varone in order to ensure the safety of the survivors. But then a second surprise attack occurred, making the train fall, which is supposed to be the reason behind the knight's death.